Hello everyone and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Tuesday, January 31st, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News Recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we will head over to Allen, where he will sit down with Eileen Wade, General Manager of the Technology Business Management Council at Apptio, to talk about the annual State of the TBM report that explores spending priorities and concerns among tech leaders, illuminating the delicate balance between innovation and cost control amid today's economic environment. Allen will then meet with Courtney Nash, Senior Research Analyst at Verica, to discuss the recent incidents across a variety of systems, such as the Ticketmaster outages and the FAA issues, and what caused them and what could the solutions be based off her research. We will then air an episode of DevOps Unbound. In this episode, Mitch Ashley is joined by our panel of experts, Parag Doshi of Tricentis, Lee Atchison of Atchison Technology, Hope Lynch of CloudBees, and Tim Banks of Dell, where they share their predictions for the upcoming year and discuss the DevOps trends to watch for in 2023, SRE, the future of software development, DevOps at the edge, and more. Then Mike Rothman talks to Tom Tovar, CEO of AppDome, about a recent survey they did gauging consumer expectations regarding mobile security. Then Mike Rothman will speak to Chen Bershon, CEO of Skyhawk Security, to discuss the state of cloud security, Skyhawk's spin-out from Radware, and why it's important to look at more than cloud logs to understand cloud security posture. We will then go to Bonnie, where she speaks with Dr. Heather Reeves, a research scientist at the University of Oklahoma, who is collaboratively working with the National Weather Service on winter driving innovations. Then Bonnie talks to Luke Kipfer, Vice President of Data Center Development and Construction for the American Real Estate Partners and Powerhouse Data Centers, about strategies, challenges, and recent achievements in sustainable data center design, construction, and optimization. Next up, Mitch will speak to LayerX CEO, Ora Shed, to discuss the launch of their browser security platform that's trying to disrupt the traditional cybersecurity market by turning any browser into a protected workspace manageable by enterprise security teams. We will then be airing a session of the DevOps Experience 2022. In this session, David Carter, head of DevOps and Infrastructure Center of Excellence at Sapphire Ventures, will talk about a brief intro into the concept of autonomous DevOps, the comparisons and contrasts with the shift to low-code, no-code, the various landscape of projects and tools that are achieving this vision, and more. To wrap up this broadcast, we have two episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike Vizard interviews C.W. Walker, Director of Product Strategy for SpyCloud, as C.W. explains what's really required to implement passwordless authentication and as organizations look to reduce their reliance on passwords to improve cybersecurity. Then, Mike interviews CodeC CEO, Shania Levin, as Shania explains why tools for visualizing code bases are becoming more important in the wake of expanding its alliance with GitHub and Microsoft. And that's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy. Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for January 31st. First up, Japan and the Netherlands have reached a deal to restrict the export of chip manufacturing technology to China. This agreement comes after a long period of pressure from the United States to curb China's growth in domestic chip production. The U.S. introduced similar limits in October of last year amidst concern that access to advanced semiconductors could increase China's military and AI power. With all this being said, though, the agreement is yet to officially be declared and may take several months to finalize legally. The main company that is impacted by this is ASML, the sole producer of ultraviolet lithography machines, crucial for the production of advanced semiconductors, which China accounted for roughly 15% of the company's sales in 2022. Additionally, the restrictions are also expected to affect Japanese companies such as Nikon and Tokyo Electron. Next, Microsoft, GitHub, and OpenAI have asked a San Francisco court to dismiss a proposed class action lawsuit that alleges they used licensed code without permission to build GitHub's AI tool, Copilot, claiming the allegations lack credibility and are based on hypothetical events. Microsoft and GitHub argue that Copilot does not harm public code and actually benefits developers by providing suggestions based on information learned from public code. The hearing to dismiss the lawsuit is scheduled for May. And despite the legal challenge, Microsoft is still committed to its partnership with OpenAI and is exploring incorporating AI into its products such as Word, PowerPoint, and Outlook. This comes as other AI companies are facing similar legal issues, including AI art tools created by Midjourney, Stability AI, and DeviantArt, as well as Getty Images suing Stability AI. We will have to stay tuned come court time, since this outcome could have huge effects on generative AI as far as copyright law is concerned. In other news, NASA has declared the Space Launch System a success after its first test, according to its preliminary analysis. This means that NASA is full steam ahead on its next mission, Artemis II, which will carry astronauts to the moon. Despite previous delays and cost overruns, the SLS had a successful launch in November and a successful 25-day mission with the uncrewed Orion capsule. NASA's teams have analyzed the data from the mission to confirm its success, stating that the SLS systems performed well and are ready for a crewed flight, with a comparison between the actual and predicted performances being within 2%. While more work is needed before the crewed missions can happen, this is a huge step forward as far as NASA's plan to return to the moon. Next up, the Federal Reserve Board has declined Custodia Bank's membership application, a cryptocurrency bank based in Wyoming. This denial is a setback for the cryptocurrencies industry goals of gaining recognition in the traditional U.S. banking sector. The denial also raises skepticism about the possibility of crypto banking. The Federal Reserve stated that Custodia's focus on crypto presented potential risks for depositors' security and soundness, and raised concerns about its ability to prevent money laundering. Zooming out, Custodia previously filed a lawsuit against the Federal Reserve for taking too long to process its application, and intends to continue with the legal process. Additionally, this decision puts Wyoming in a tough space, as it has been working to become a hub for cryptocurrency and blockchain businesses by implementing laws that are favorable towards them. On Digital CXO, we have an article looking at how to achieve optimal ROI from the cloud. The cloud has become a core part of many enterprises, but not all executives are getting their expected ROI from their cloud investments. This article takes a look on how to get the most out of cloud. To learn more, go to digitalcxo.com. On Container Journal, we have an article that looks at how Venafi added a Kubernetes support to its certificate management platform. Venafi has stated that this update will make it easier to secure highly distributed fleets of clusters across cloud-native applications. To learn more, go to containerjournal.com. Finally, on Security Boulevard, we have an article that looks at how ChainGuard released a memory-safe distribution of Linux. ChainGuard stated that this new distribution will provide a safer platform for securing software supply chains that rely on Linux. To learn more, go to securityboulevard.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I've got a really great new guest that we haven't had on before. She's the head of an organization that we haven't covered before, working with a company called Apptio that we're going to hear about, that we have covered before. But let me introduce you all to Eileen Wade. Hi Eileen, how are you?
Hi Alan, I'm great. Hello community, it's nice to be here. Thanks for welcoming me.
It's our pleasure. So Eileen, I hope I didn't embarrass you with or set too high an expectation, but why don't you give people a little background about yourself and your organization, and we can go from there.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Thanks for Thanks I'm super excited about this opportunity to talk about the Technology Business Management Council and a recent research report that we have released on technology business management, or TBM. You'll hear me talk about TBM for the rest of the conversation. So I'm the general manager of the TBM Council. The TBM Council, we are coming on our 11th year. We are a nonprofit that has over 10,000 members globally. Primarily, most of our members do come from North America, but we have growing membership in Europe and in Southeast Asia and Australia, New Zealand, Japan. We're very excited, India. So we're definitely, and I'll touch on a couple of the reasons we see that membership growing. But the TBM Council was founded by Aptio, actually, and Aptio still to this day sits as our technology advisor, our tech advisor. The TBM Council, we have a mission that is to advance the discipline of TBM. So we don't talk products or solutions or things along those lines. We are all about the discipline of TBM and educating tech, finance leaders, and cloud experts, cloud engineers on TBM and the discipline. We do that through 3 core pillars, or our mandates, if you will. And those are, we do it through an education series. So we offer a variety of education courses, both certifications as well as primers. We also offer, and we do it through collaboration events. So whether that's, thankfully, back to being in person, some in-person events, small and large, as well as a lot of virtual engagements. So we offer a monthly TBM Tuesday webinar where we bring leaders and practitioners on to share their stories. And then also a secure virtual platform for the members to engage with themselves so that they can just reach out directly, start chat boards, create their own communities, engage with each other around the globe. And then the most critical part that the TBM Council has offered the community from its very beginning was actually standards, and the standards development that is the foundation to a strong technology business management office or practice in an organization. So
love it. Good stuff. So Eileen, and maybe there was a lot of information there for me to digest. I apologize.
The main
I had
goal,
a slide; it'd be so much better.
Well, but
I'm kidding.
Work on our videos, but
but the main goal of the technology of the TBM, right? What? Just a sentence. What's it? What's the main push here?
TBM. So TBM, the discipline, or TBM, the council, or both?
If you wouldn't mind, give me both.
Okay. So the TBM discipline, the mission of the TBM discipline, the main, benefit of TBM, if you adopt and start to practice TBM inside your organization, is it gives you better strategies and more value. It basically proves the value of your technology investments. It brings those silos down, removes the emotion, increases trust across business units and organizations. Everyone knows that technology now, every company is a technology company because every company has had to go to a digital focused, engagement, whether you're B2B or you're B2C. And TBM is the way that a CIO can manage the business of technology. And now we actually see more and more that the TBM office actually sits in accounting or finance, reporting up to the CFO, not even through the CIO now sometimes. We see it also, there's a growing group that is growing within product and engineers. So TBM is really that element that allows you to make rapid decisions for your better technology investments, to prove your value of your investments, and prove that the shifts that you're making in your organization are paying out to drive your business strategies forward.
I love it. And specifically the council's mission is to advance.
Yes, the council's mission is to advance that discipline. So it's to educate the global technology and financial community on how it is that they can go about and adopt these principles and these standards within their company. And ultimately, grow to a point where you are seeking solutions and you're able to adopt those solutions to make you best of class in executing a TBM practice across your company. And TBM also complements a lot of other disciplines. For example, very, very integrated with the FinOps discipline. There's also scaled agile, the agile, the enterprise agile planning, and a lot of the disciplines that support that. TBM is really kind of, if you look at it, it would be like your overarching governance that your tech and finance leaders can use to guide and make sure that all those individual kind of business units and disciplines and strategy structures are moving towards the same goal together and collectively, and that quick decisions can be made across that board.
Love it. Thank you so much. So I know we're going to talk about a survey you guys recently did, but I got one other thing I need to just, in terms of laying the foundation here. We mentioned Applio and its connection to the council. For people who maybe aren't familiar with Applio, the company, can you just give
Sure.
I realize you're not the Applio spokesman, obviously, or spokesperson.
I'm happy to talk about them, though. They're
All right, go ahead.
The council wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Apptio and the founders of Apptio and their generosity and kind of just courage, really. So TBM, or excuse me, Apptio. See, naturally, I automatically go.
I get you.
Apptio really is an interesting time for me to actually give this answer because we're facing a lot of the global challenges and economic challenges that we had back at the time that Apptio was founded. So Apptio was actually founded in 2007, late 2007, really hit the ground running, obviously 2008, but that was right in the middle of a massive recession and really, worldwide global economic challenges. Apptio was created because some of the CIOs that our founder, Sunny Gupta, worked with and supported in a previous role, he casually asked one time, well, what would you like me to focus on? What would you like me to do next? And many of them said, I need a solution. I need something that helps me manage the business of my technology here at the company. I need something that really shows true technology financial management that can bring down those silos. And the founders went out and did that, and they created the first, what is now part of the Apptio stack. It's called Apptio One. It's really the technology financial management solution within the Apptio stack. And they created that, but through that, they did it through an advisory board of CIOs. So there was a group of CIOs, some of the early adopters of TBM, Ralph Laura, who at the time was with the Clorox company, Rebecca Jacoby, who was the CIO at Cisco, Larry Godick was at American Financial, Tom Murphy was at AmerisourceBergen. Just a couple of these founding CIOs, they were acting as Apptio CIO advisors. They became so passionate about this discipline that was being created. And I'm seeing sunny dots on my face.
Yes,
Discipline that was being created that they ended up asking and saying, we'd love the actual discipline element to be its own community and to be brought out. And the founders of Apptio, Sunny Gupta, Kurt Schinthofer, they're the ones that said, we're going to back you and we're going to do this. And so it was 11 years ago now, just this year, that the TBM Council was founded as a nonprofit with that pure focus to only focus on the discipline and advancing that discipline.
Eileen, thanks so much for the background on both the council, Apptio, the whole ABM the story here. I want to jump in now, though, to the survey that you guys recently did.
Right.
So tell us.
Yeah. So this is the second annual survey, and it's really the state of TBM. And so we launched our very first inaugural survey in 2021. We chose at that first year to focus on the results, responses from the community only, so only from our membership. That survey was fantastic, but we did realize that by focusing purely on the Technology Council the TBM Council's membership, we were probably looking at a little bit of a skewed perspective because
it's an echo chamber.
Right. If they're in TBM Council, they have an interest in TBM. Therefore, they're probably a little more knowledgeable than a broader group. So in 2022, we set out to expand that, and we wanted to grow that response rate. We had over 700 responses. Of that, we vetted and validated about 570, just under 570 responses for this survey. And it was profound with some of the things that we saw. Couple of the things that we saw were things that we knew, and I've even kind of mentioned right now is that TBM and a TBM office, if you will, really does sit in the technology. Most of the time it sits in the technology team under the CIO or CTO, but we have a great majority that also sits under accounting and finance, as I've mentioned before. But one of the greatest things that we saw, especially with the digital transformation happening and TBM, as we modernize this discipline for the modern enterprise, we're looking at cloud financial management, we're looking at cloud financial optimization, and also though, enterprise agile planning, and that shift from projects to products. That is a growing area where TBM is living. So we actually found through this survey that we have a growth of, I'm going to pull out the number, of our respondents, about a combined 14%, almost 15% sit within the project product management office or engineering. So that plays true to what we see TBM doing with managing across all of these different disciplines and kind of being that overarching governance for that executive leadership team to be able to drive strategy.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So that, and I think it goes to IT being integrated into the business.
Exactly.
It's not a cost center. It's not some appendage. It's really, as you said in the beginning, IT and software, and it's part. You can't do digital transformation without it. And today, all these companies are digitally transforming.
Yes. Yes.
So
we also found, just to jump in here, we also found that sometimes, often, or, I'd say maybe more often than not, individuals sometimes think that TBM is a discipline meant for only that large enterprise global organization. And we know that to not be true, but the survey really showed us that. We actually saw that there was, of the majority, and I'm looking down at my stats here, more than half, just over half, were actually with organizations that had between 1,000 and 5,000 employees. And then you had the larger companies after that. But so it is something that I think is important to say, to your community is, if you're not a super regional or a super global company, that's okay. TBM is still for you. And there are, the discipline and the solutions that can help you manage that investment strategy for your technology investments. TBM can help you in doing that. So.
Very cool. I always find with every survey, there's always one thing that makes me shake my head or scratch my head and say, wow, it's a surprise.
Yeah.
What do you think? Was there a big surprise here for you?
There was a big surprise, and it was a great surprise. Like, it was what we wanted to see, but we didn't know if we would see it yet. And that was really going back to the shift of, the shift between to projects to products and that enterprise agile thinking and that approach that businesses are making. We found that actually 69% of our respondents were in the process of either completely adopting an enterprise agile strategy under their TBM office or moving in that direction. And so that is a massive, we thought it would actually be a little lower. We knew we'd see it, but we didn't think we'd see it at a number of 69%. So we were super pleased to see that, because again, it just shows that pervasiveness across the many areas of the organization that are coming together to all drive strategy together through technology.
I love it. Eileen, we're running low on time, but for people who want to maybe grab a copy of the survey report and dive in deeper, where could they go?
Absolutely. So tbmcouncil.org is our website, and you can, and I'm going to do two plugs here. So yes, the TBM Council, the State of TBM Report, 2022 report can be found there under our resources. But also, I encourage you to become a member. Our membership is complimentary. The only investment you make is of your time and how much you want to get out of it. And we welcome new members and new voices. And there's, check out the education series. We offer our taxonomy, which again goes back to that foundational standards. Our TBM taxonomy is there for you. So whatever we can do to help you learn more about the discipline, advance in the discipline, we're here to help, because TBM really is a binding force across your company if you choose to go down the path.
I love it. And just for people who may want to find out more about Aptio, that's apptio.com.
apptio.com is Aptio, yes.
Good.
And then tbmcouncil.org is TBM Council.
.org.
Yes.
Eileen, thank you so much for coming on and making us aware of TBM and of this report. And thank you for your hard work.
Oh, Alan, thanks for
Good
having
counsel.
me. I appreciate it. And hopefully this won't be our last conversation. It's been
No,
really
no.
fun.
Absolutely not. Eileen
Great.
Wade from the TBM Council here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We're going to be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. My guest for this next segment is my friend Courtney Nash. Of course, Courtney runs The Void. She'll tell you a little bit about it. And we're going to talk about, what's been going on, some of the things been going on lately out in our world. Courtney's always a great person to talk about it. Courtney, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Alan. I'm well, thank you. A little jet lagged. I was traveling a bit, but I'm back and ready to talk about all the fun that we've been seeing.
Well, we're going to talk about, I think, traveling as well. But yes, I mean, the good news is we're all starting to travel more, excited and seeing things after the last 3 years, though. You quickly, if your experience is anything like mine, you quickly find out the airlines haven't gotten a lot better in the last 3 years. They pretty much is the same thing it was before COVID. Crowded planes, small seats.
I like to give the airlines a lot of credit because I feel like we've learned a lot from them as an industry, but they're having a rough go, I'll say, right now.
Well, to be fair, it's not just the airlines. It's everything around them. But let's not, before we get to that, Courtney, I got to come back, and I said Courtney Nash from The Void. People who aren't familiar, why don't you tell them a little bit about The Void?
Yep. So the Void is the Verica Open Incident Database. We're about 2 years old now. We collect incident reports for software. So when things like you might know about right now, the FAA, Southwest Airlines, Ticketmaster, all things we might talk about, when these services fail, if anybody writes about it, we collect all of those into this database. So we have about 10,000 reports right now. And our goal is really to just raise awareness of software related failures, because as you were sort of alluding to, like, our world relies on software now. Everything, our planes, our concert tickets, our banks, like, it all relies on software. And we don't really have a collective understanding of why these things don't always work. And they won't always work, I think is one interesting part of it. So we've been collecting these reports. We've just put out our own report, the Void Report 2022, the second one, where we look at data that we collect from these reports and try to sort of push our thinking forward in the technology industry about how we think about software failures, why these things fail. There's a lot of, in my opinion, sort of misconceptions or myths and common ideas that we might have that are not necessarily, I mean, they're grounded in what we feel like is reality. But I think we have a lot to learn about how we think about failure, first of all, just as humans, but in software systems. It's really easy to blame people for things. And, so for example, the FAA situation has ultimately sort of come down to one engineer who, pushed out the wrong database file. And then all of FAA goes down. And we don't know much more than that at this point, right? But what I thought was interesting about the FAA situation was they didn't blame that person, really. They didn't say, they sort of said, our systems ultimately should have handled this better. There's a lot of should have, would have, could have. But I thought that was really interesting because it's very common, especially when the issue seems to come down to a person, which happens a lot, that we used to just blame people all the time for these things. And so it's a complicated situation, the FAA thing, obviously, but I was really sort of pleased to at least see that they said this wasn't just one person's fault. This was a system. Now, lots of people have criticisms of that system. Should it have been updated sooner? Like a lot of that. But the Void looks at that. We look at all kinds of implications of software failures and how we can learn from those. And collectively, as an industry, people who work in software systems get better at it. And that's where I say I love what the airlines used to do. The airlines started sharing their incidents a while ago. This was back in the
Yes.
90s. And they got better, right? They got better. So maybe there's more to do now. There's work to be done for the airline industry, but I still think we're lagging even behind that as a software industry. So that our research is really focused on looking deeply into these kinds of incidents versus at the surface facts as much as we can. So that's the newest report. Talks a lot about some very technical details of software incidents, like how long it takes for things to resolve. And I think we talked about this last time. So like mean time to resolve is considered a very gold standard metric.
Red herring.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. It feels right? Like it feels like, okay, well, how long does it take us on average to fix our software systems? Like I don't actually think that it was foolish per se to choose that as a metric, but we didn't look very closely at the underlying data. And now that we have a bunch of these together, we're able to do that, right? We're able to actually look at the data and underneath, right? How long does it take for each company to resolve all their incidents? And it's not conducive to something like mean time to resolve. And so that's one of the findings that we confirmed in the 2002 report. We really would love our industry to move past using that as a metric, because it's kind of just lying to you, right?
Yeah, I think it's red herring. I mean, let me weigh in if you don't mind, Courtney.
I would love for you to weigh in.
So, I think when it comes to incidents, especially around incidents with computers, internet, technology, there's this like, you know how hard it is to, and the economists try to measure consumer confidence. I think there's a consumer confidence type of thing with computers, right? And this FAA thing, it was a perfect example, right? We were talking off camera. When I first saw the news around this FAA thing, my first thought was, oh my God, I hope this wasn't a terrorist, some state-sponsored hacking, a real cyber incident, if you will. Right?
Yeah, and that was the response from all the way up to the president saying, we don't believe this is, it's
well, that's your first thought, because
well,
this is why we can't have nice things in general, right? We're all still a little, we're just conditioned.
Airplanes, elections, we're pretty paranoid for good reason.
Exactly.
And it's almost like, so when the news came out, it was a bad file in a database. I think for the most part, non-tech people shrugged and says, look, that's computers for you. I mean, that's kind of the common thing is, it's computers, man. Hit Control-Alt-Delete and start over or something. And we've almost become, I don't know if it's desensitized or conditioned to expect these kinds of things. When the fact is, I'm going to take the contrarian role. When you look at the amount of planes that are in the air every single day over the U.S., the fact that we don't have more serious incidents is a testament to how well these systems run.
That's not okay. So, in my opinion, that's not a contrarian view. But
well, people
they work more often than they don't. And this is the thing about humans and perception and outages and these kinds of things. It's very easy for us to latch on to the failures and the bad things, and those get very publicized, right? Because the good news, the best news articles aren't like U.S. air industry mostly working all the time. Like no one's gonna read that article. So it's a perception problem, though, right? Like we see the 1% or even less of that things don't work, and our brain doesn't fill in the 99.9%. Like that's not how our brains work. And so we have to constantly be kind of fighting against those kinds of instincts. And we talk about that in the report too. It's not easy to do, but it would be great if we could study maybe not all the successes, right? Because nobody has that much time, but study the near misses. Right. And this is also an airline industry learning, and other industries too, though, sort of maritime industries, nuclear power. Like, where did you almost, can I swear on this program? No.
Sure. Yeah. We're adults.
Like, where were the oh shit moments?
Right.
Right? Because those are so telling. Like, it didn't quite, you caught it. And what was that? What was happening in that moment where you caught it? Because that's your system largely working as designed, right? The things we do to make it work the majority of the time, only every once in a while turn out to be the things that make it not work. And they're the same system. We don't, so that's...
Well,
so two thoughts on that. First of all, there's a very thin line between working and not working in a lot of our systems, okay?
We operate at the boundaries.
Yes.
That's where the money is. That's where the opportunity is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we get very
and it's
good
scary.
at performing in those little nominal spaces.
In the gray space. Yeah, no, in the
Then the other thing is, though, that, we talk about critical infrastructure. We talk about infrastructure upgrades. We need digital infrastructure upgrades as much as we need roads and bridges many times.
Yeah. I mean, I think there the metaphor works. I think sometimes we steal metaphors and technology and we abuse them or misuse them. But it's critical infrastructure. I think the interesting thing, for example, about the FAA case or the Southwest Airlines case, which happened sort of right before the holidays and had a similar feel to it, is, well, let's set the FAA aside because that has all the government, do they get enough funding, angle to it. But one of the biggest criticisms about Southwest Airlines is not like, it is, your technology's so old, but you have to go back and ask why. Why is it so old? And why did Southwest not invest in that over time? There's going to be a million case studies, I think, on this Southwest Airlines situation, because it was a business failure. It wasn't a technology failure. And if you ask anyone who'd worked in that, within that company or within that industry, the same thing. Southwest Airlines had operated at a very, very narrow margin compared to even so if you take the slice that the airline industry works in of performance near the margin where they're going to fail, Southwest Airlines took that right to the edge. And that was part of their business model. And
but they were always known. I mean, Courtney, Southwest were the smart cookies in the airline industry, right? They locked in fuel prices for 3 years. They innovated. They out-innovated the big guys. Yeah. And, they were kind of the Avis we try harders of the airline industry. Yeah. But now we came to find out, maybe they did all those things, but they didn't really update their IT as much as they could have.
Their IT worked just as well as they wanted it to until it didn't.
Yeah, and that's
they
reality.
Being at the business level, right? Now at the operational level, people have been clamoring for them to update it because they were the people in that system. We talk a lot about people in systems,
and they were the shit people.
The people are providing the adaptation that the technology won't, and so as far as the business is concerned, still working until the entire pressure on that system outweighed what even the people could adapt to. And then you see the whole thing sort of fall apart. So
what?
Yeah.
Back to your near miss, shit stuff, right? I'm sure there were near miss, shit stuff going on for years that they say, hey, we dodged that bullet, dodged that one too, and we're okay. We'll get through this, right? And then the crows come home to roost, and
yeah, I mean, if you talk to pilots or ground crew or other folks at Southwest, they, and even the union had been screaming at Southwest for years to update, but we as humans and then companies as entities tend not to react until it's really bad, which is sad.
Unfortunately. So let's come down from the skies. And any other recent incidents or stuff that you want to
Well, the other one that we put in the void late last year, was Ticketmaster.
Oh.
Did you get Taylor Swift tickets, incident. Alan? Did you?
No. So I'm going to tell you something, not for nothing, but it was through Capital One, not through Amex, and I happen to have both. But I put in my request through Cap One early on for the pre-order, and I got a very nice note that basically said, "You lost. We didn't choose you." And I immediately thought, well, they must be age discriminating, but I didn't. Between you and me, I wasn't losing sleep over not seeing Taylor Swift anyway. But but what it was that my niece asked me to get them, truth be told, for her.
That's usually what it is.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, I didn't make the pre-sale. Let me see how this works. And then I saw what, keeping in our motif today, what a shit show it was. And I was like, this is crazy. They, the absolute power corrupts absolutely. They need a good competitor to keep these people straight because this don't work.
So that's the argument. Although, the funny thing is Spotify was like, whoo, because the Ticketmaster thing took all the attention off Spotify, who also fell over momentarily. And they were very prepared. They knew it was coming, but even still, there are forces that are hard, even when you're well prepared. But the Ticketmaster situation is interesting. Have you been following any of the coverage, the congressional coverage?
Yes, I've been watching.
I don't know, so there's the whole monopolistic side of it, which I think is...
Yep.
I'm not going to necessarily disagree with, and I certainly hope. But what's been fascinating to me are the details and the discussion around bots. And congressional. First and foremost, Taylor Swift has united the country.
Yeah, no doubt.
The only thing that Democrats and Republicans can agree on is that everybody wants Taylor Swift.
We want our Taylor tickets. I get you.
So that's what it comes to in our country. But the bot thing is really fascinating to me because Congress has kind of latched onto that and said, why haven't you developed algorithms for these bots? And I'm not saying it's a tough problem. So bots are a really big problem. Depending on who you ask, 40% of internet traffic is bots. And the interesting thing is bots aren't necessarily bad. They can be good. Siri's a bot. Most of the things you chat with for like customer service, Amazon, where's my stuff? That's a bot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So it's all contextual and relative, right? But
not even to mention this new chat bot, right? GPT.
I'm not going there. You can get someone else on to talk about.
No, that's a whole different show.
I'm not doing that.
Different show. Uh-huh.
But there's this sort of after the fact judgment, like, why haven't you done this? And I think it's interesting because, of course, they haven't done anything about the bots because of the monopolistic, right? So when you go back up to the incentives, that tells you a lot about the technology systems. And so it's really easy, again, to focus on the technology, right? To focus on why did Ticketmaster go down, the traffic,
I got to stop you a second.
Yeah.
It's really easy when you're some congressman who God knows what you did to get your seat, but you don't know diddly about bots and technology, and you're going to start telling the technology people what they should have, could have, would have done.
Yeah, so it's fascinating to watch that play out because we regularly complain about how our representatives are not well versed in technology.
They're not. That's a different show too, Courtney. Sorry,
what we like to do at The Void is we like to take something that seems like a technological thing, and then we like to take it all the way back up to like, what does that system look like? What are the incentives? What's actually happening? What kinds of decisions were made far away from the poor people trying to make Ticketmaster run that day? And so those are the kinds of questions we want people to start asking, not just why did the database file, cause it to come down, because that's usually the easy story, but not the whole story. So I'll be very curious to see what happens with Ticketmaster, but
we'll watch. I mean, I knew this was a problem like last year because I have season tickets to football. I get a lot of Yankee tickets for when I go to New York. I have down here we have Broadway theater that, touring Broadway shows. I have tickets to that. And then I have my regular Ticketmaster account. So I have 5 different five different accounts for tickets that I came to find out were all Ticketmaster under the covers. And I had 5 different logons. So every time I would go to open my touring Broadway tickets, it was using my Miami Dolphins ticket logon, or this one, and I'm like, how do I remember 5? Because they're all under am.ticketmaster.com, right? But they're different. And I said to myself, this is going to come back to bite someone soon, because it don't work. It don't make sense.
Yeah. But then, like I always say, it's always incentives. Like, where are the incentives, right? And Ticketmaster
the incentives were they had it locked up. Anyway.
Ticketmaster wasn't incentivized to care about bots. It was working for them. right?
No, it absolutely was. And they
now,
do
will
promote
legislation
people.
solve that? I don't think so, but
No,
we'll see how that
we
plays
need
out.
a good competitor.
Anyway, Courtney, we're out of time, but it was so great catching up. We didn't tell people. They want to get more about the Void and stay up to date. Where do they go?
Yeah, so they go to thevoid.community, which is a very strange URL. I realize I'll give it to you. If you have show notes, you can put that in there. You can search through there, see what kinds of incidents are happening more recently, but I definitely recommend people go download the 2022 report. It talks a lot about the people in the systems, these technological systems. And I think it's really easy to forget about that. That people build, maintain, and run these things, and we have to pay more attention to them and how they help make it work most of the time, as we were talking about today, and how they help solve it when things do go wrong. So hopefully people go download the report, and we'll talk about some more soon, I'm sure, because it's not going to go away.
Unfortunately. Courtney Nash from The Void, thevoid.community. Check it out here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of DevOps Unbound. We've got a great topic, great panel. In 2023, where are we going with this thing called DevOps? So, well, we're not a predictions conversation. We're just kind of talking about the state of the art, what do we think is going to happen in the evolution of DevOps, and kind of what have we learned along the ways. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CTO with Techstrong Group, co-host along with Alan Schimmel, who is busy on other activities. I think he's away on assignment, as they say in the biz, and happy to be hosting in his stead. And I, of course, want to thank our great friends at Tricentis. Tricentis has sponsored DevOps Unbound since its beginning over 2 years ago. Been a fantastic partner, helping us with topics and guests and creative input along the way, along working with Lanier as well as with Jody on our producer team. So thank you, Tricentis, for sponsoring this show. Great. Well, let's move on to our topic. I first want to start by having our guests introduce themselves. Hope, would you start?
Sure. Hope Lynch, Senior Director of Platform at CloudBees. Have been in technology for a long time. So very interested in talking about these changes today.
Fantastic. Tim, jump right in there.
Sure. Tim Banks, Lead Developer Advocate with Dell Technologies. I've been in the DevOps game for a hot minute also. And having been both in the cloud hyperscaler side and the hardware manufacturer side and the private cloud side, just kind of looking forward to seeing what we do next.
A lot of stuff we use today and going forward for sure. Thanks for being here, Tim. And welcome, Lee. Good to be talking with you again.
Nice to see you again, Mitch. My name's Lee Atchison. I've been in cloud computing and DevOps since really they became words, I think. And I'm a software architect, consultant, author, and my latest book, Overcoming IT Complexity, was just released and is been doing fine.
Congratulations on the new book. Now our problems are solved. We've got the answers on how to deal with all that complexity. Not to put too much pressure on you or oversell, but no, it's a fine book. Everybody check it out. It's an O'Reilly book.
I'm Parag Doshi, VP of Customer Engineering here at Tricentis. Really excited to be here and talk about our predictions for this year. It's already 2023. And let's see what happens.
And you can't refer to the first 3 weeks of January. I predict this because it's already happened.
It's already happened.
Just kidding. All right. Welcome, Parag. As always, great to have you with us. And again, thanks to Tricentis for sponsoring DevOps Unbound. We're talking about kind of where are we in the state of DevOps and this adoption. Some of us been doing it maybe 5, 6, 7 years. Other folks maybe earlier. Maybe it's pretty new, a year or less, maybe a year or two. A lot of things have happened, I know, since I remember first learning about DevOps. Hope, why don't you start us out, kind of give us a sort of your version where we are on this continuum of whatever DevOps is and is going to become.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very interesting time, one of the most interesting I've seen since I've been involved with DevOps, and partly the impacts of AI, ML, low code, no code, all of these things that are sort of converging at the same time on developers. And then people are also now thinking more about what is the experience for developers? How are they actually connected to the business? It's not the developer in the back room anymore, and it's normalized now. This is part of how business is done, having DevOps as part of your practice. So I think we're at a very interesting time. I look forward to it playing out.
Sure. We all agree. Nothing left to be said. I think you covered it all. No. Probably some other opinions here. Jump in. Ever.
So certainly machine learning and AI, if that isn't the headline of any discussion of the future when it comes to DevOps, it really should be. And I agree with you, Hope. But I'm also interested in the operations side of AI and machine learning. We've already seen the use of heavy machine learning when it comes to analytics and examining analytics and finding trends in large amounts of data and things like that. But I'm also really excited to see some of the things that might be happening with AI in, scanning code pre-deployment for security violations or just code reviews in general, and the ability of what sorts of things or even bad actors that can be discovered pre-release. We're now, DevOps has really enabled us to have, thousands and thousands and thousands of releases a day, and Amazon still does one every 11 seconds, something like that. And that's a lot of code that's getting deployed to our applications, and more applications are extending across multiple companies with SaaS services that fit into it, et cetera. So having tools like that can help us, scan the reliability of our system before it becomes an issue is going to be critical. So I think machine learning and AI is going to be critical, not only from the developer standpoint, and we're just seeing the beginning of what can happen there, but also on the operation standpoint and the pre-release as well as post-release monitoring that we can do.
I think it's interesting you talk about how AI and ML will kind of drive DevOps, but I do think that we also have to take into account that DevOps, like the deployment of AI and ML, both whether it's the data stores, whether it's the analytics that go into creating these models, right, or the actual hardware itself. That's going to require a lot of wrenches turned in the DevOps pipelines, and it's not going to be the same as always. I think the other big concern that I have as far as AI and ML is that how do we keep these pools of data from generating malware themselves? Like, how do we keep it pure? How do we keep people from predicting what questions are going to get asked over time and start injecting malicious answers to them, right? And the more that we are reliant on AI and ML to do these kinds of basic programming things, and they say, oh, well, we can replace junior engineers, which I don't believe. But the more that we become reliant on AI for answers, the less scrutiny we're giving those answers. And I think that's a big gap.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Chat AI has kind of proven that and brought that to the forefront when the OpenAI team actively acknowledges that the reliability of the answers are sometimes suspect because of the learning that went into the data and the process used for that learning process, for that learning procedure.
Yeah, but I will say though, that I have seen, poking around in Reddit in some of the DevOps corners there, where there are developers who are saying they're using it as a coding partner now, right? They are using it to come up with additional ideas, find shortcuts. So it's not that it's replacing them and they are not, blind faith in it, thank goodness. But it is helping them have access to a wider category of ideas faster.
Right. I know this is a topic you've got a lot of thoughts on. So jump in there.
Yeah. I was just waiting there because, agree with everybody. And, I know ChatGPT, everybody's like, wow, this is so awesome. It's going to change everything. And then there's a segment of the population, as has been for the last, 6 decades since the word robot was coined by Isaac Asimov, right? That, jobs are at stake. Okay. Well, let's look at what DevOps has done to all these companies to increase profitability and how much depth have we gotten into all these major enterprises. It's still not prevalent. There are more development teams that are not using these agile, lean DevOps processes. So it takes a village to get DevOps right. So as with any new technology, as with AI has always been, I see it as decision support systems, as I think Hope was talking about. How do we empower? There's too much put on the developers. And the security comment of another scanner finding anomalies, heck, I have enough scanners. I'm so tired of them. The signal noise ratio is just terrible. So I need to know what are the things to care about. So if I have AI to be the decision support system for humans to do their job better, well, I'd be happy if it takes only 80% of the village right now. It takes 1,000 people to do it in a $100 billion market cap company today to do it right at scale for thousands of different agile teams, right? So we need all the help we can get. I think there's no shortage of jobs. And I see this AI movement as actually empowering. And this might sound a little self-serving for a company like ours, Tricentis. We make tools that assure that whatever you're trying to do is done the way you expected. Testing, right? So you're creating applications and software from your own imagination, from customers' requirements, and you have to validate whether or not they did that, right? So I think this is going to be the year where testing will explode. It will have a slow start. AI has always been a part of testing, and it will augment, it will enhance, but we're always going to second guess. Okay, did my ChatGPT version 22, I just made that up, right? Is it still good enough? Because what did I actually learn from the testing, right? The humans still got to learn. You got to get the oracle out of that testing. So.
To be clear, AI.
Frog, did you say we might have oversold AI in the last 6 or more decades?
No, I don't think we've oversold it.
I do believe we have.
I agree with you.
I got started in it.
I think we'll always second guess it, right? Look at the number of false positives, right? The signal noise ratio. So if it can help us reduce false positives, if it could take 10 different scanners, that we use, and different vendors of each of those same things that are semi-overlapping, and make it more intelligent and say, look, based on history, your software has done poorly in production in these areas at this step in the user's journey of using your application, and therefore it gives you a higher signal noise ratio to look here, this is not a false positive. Then we're just going to become more efficient. We're going to become more confident in releasing. I think that's what will happen.
To be clear, I think AI of all stripes is a tool to help people. It's not a tool to replace people. And I think that's, you bring up that point. I think you're right, that since the days of Isaac Asimov, that's been the fear of science fiction, but that's not the point at all. And nothing is more hyped nowadays than ChatGPT, right? I mean, it's probably the most hyped technology available right now. But in the end, it's not a tool to replace people. It is not. But it can help perform some types of tasks and some of the things that, that machine learning is good for. And some of the things that machine learning is good for is analyzing large quantities of data to look for anomalies. And those anomalies can then be analyzed by humans to figure out what's going on or whatever. So I think the idea of scanning that we talk about is about finding anomalies. My mouth isn't working yet this morning. I'm sorry about that. But as we move forward, it's like with thousands of releases going on a day, there's no way that we can reliably predict that all of that is accurate. So one good use for machine learning is to make sure to do the scanning to look for changes in analytic data that happen and correlate them to releases. Some of those sorts of things are tools that help humans prevent them from having to spend all of that time that they're not good at analyzing large quantities of data. Humans aren't good at spending large quantities of time looking at the same thing over and over again. Computers are very good at that. Machine learning is very good at that. And for tools like that,
we can spend a lot of time looking at YouTube.
We can spend a lot of time looking at YouTube, yes.
So I have a question for let's kind of shape this, take a little bit different direction. I appreciate the AI, ML, and ChatGPT, and that's sort of the shiny object at the moment in the world of AI and ML. But the people part of it, we talked about. There was. If I can bring up sort of a tangential example, the whole Southwest Airlines and baggage and scheduling and all of that kind of thing, not to drag them into the topic. But one of the takeaways for me out of that was they kicked back to fully manual, trying to do everything by hand when the systems didn't work. And it was clearly far beyond the capacity, not intellectually, but just quantity and the amount of data analyzed and situations to handle was far beyond what a human could do. And it seems like that's part of what we're doing in DevOps is increasing velocity by doing the things that we can do with software and then leveraging people's skills and expertise. Like Parag, I'm sure we don't need the top tester examining the results of every test run, right? You want that person working on the next set of challenges or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think this whole notion of AI. I'm going to steal another one from Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's the fact that you need to be adaptable, right? So if you're really concerned about people and all, it's really. You're in technology, your job is going to change. Actually, if you're not in technology, it changes. If you're a farmer, look, in the 1800s, everybody knew a farmer, right? Now you can't find one, right, in your cities and all. So agriculture has completely changed because now we know exactly where to irrigate, every single molecule of soil, if you will, right? So I think having AI or having these capabilities come to market to make people more efficient, that's really why you're hired, is for your creativity. Like you said, it's not for someone to examine, a billion test results on that application. We want to know what are those 5 things that are going to lead to problems, because this is the year of productivity, right? People are going to be tightening their belts. Okay, we're going to be rationalizing our applications. We're going to be rationalizing how much time you can spend building an application, testing an application, and how efficiently you can continuously deploy it. So we're going to have to become smarter. And to the extent AI is just one other tool, it will allow us to devote more time to those areas where you were originally hired, right? To know out of the 1,000 different ways things can go wrong, what are those top 5 that could cause an outage or that could cause performance degradation? If you can home in on those things, then you can get in front of those kinds of things. And I think that's what role humans will play.
And I think this also ties in so closely, and I haven't seen anyone necessarily state it this way, but there's been a lot more conversation around developer experience. Like you said, there are a lot of jobs open, right? And if developers are unhappy for too long, or they're not getting the tools they need, or, the conditions of the workplace are not what, they hope for, they're going to look for another opportunity. But if you can find a way to make their experience of working and how they develop their software and how they test their software, and they get other tools to help them, and they feel more accomplished, they're able to be more creative. A lot of people forget that developers are creative people, then, they're happier. Their experience is better. Maybe they stay longer. Maybe they produce better product for the customers.
What's happened over the years, developers have taken on more. Okay, now developers are responsible for security. How many developers like to test even their own code, right? Do code reviews, right? They don't want to do these things. So I think this is going to be an explosion of more low code, right? That's what we're seeing in our market, that can we make tools reduce friction so much so the developer doesn't have to think about the mundane, doesn't have to figure out, okay, which scanning tool do I have? It's actually left shifted into my pipeline. They don't have to think about, okay, I added 100 lines of code and I'm going to commit it. Did it actually cause a performance degradation? I can do a smoke performance test as part of the pipeline, and I'm going to get a high signal to noise ratio of where things are, where I need to put my attention. Oh, it was those last 100 lines of code that I added that has something to do with the change in performance, right? So I think low code and putting more and more into the pipeline so we can get less things piled on a developer. I think that's what we need to do.
So I think to that,
I'm going to disagree a little bit with that.
Go ahead. Let's get Tim in here.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I would say to that end, Parag, I think though the reason that more has been put on the developer has been maybe a result of, what I feel is a misuse of the DevOps culture, where instead of empowering a developer to be able to do more, they're saying we can use these tools so the developers can be ops and they can do deployment, and now they can do security because now we have these tools for doing it, instead of allowing those tools to enable people who specialize that to do those things. And back to Hope's point earlier about using, and your point earlier, it's about utilizing AI and ML to enable folks to be able to make better choices, to use them at tools. That's not what we've seen in the past. We know that historically, engineering cultures, engineering leadership will say, well, we can use it to save money by getting rid of security people, by getting rid of operations folks, by getting rid of SRE, and then putting it all on developers, and then using the managed services for the rest. And what I really think we need to start seeing the opposite of, right, is that over-reliance on tools and automation because of what you saw, like with Southwest and things like that. And to the point of where we're talking about where folks are with careers and jobs, we saw, 20 to 30,000 layoffs between 3 large companies, not just junior folks, but some very, very senior talent. That is a big talent drain. That is a big drain of folks who knew how to do these things because they came from a time before everything was pushed on the developers, right? And so what's going to be the effect of that on our pipelines? What's going to be the effect of that on these companies that they build and the companies that these people eventually go to? And so I think when we're talking about how we use these tools to enable people to do things, we need to talk about enabling people to still have specialties and still have areas of concentration so the developers can just develop, and these tools can make the people in these specialties, whether it's operations or security or networking or whatever it is, more effective at their jobs instead of taking their jobs and putting it on the developer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we need enough for just getting it into the developer's site to bring in that specialty, right? If you see, hey, there's a CVE like this, I want to go to my security expert, common vulnerability or exposure, right? I want to go to my security expert and ask, do I really need to care about this, right? The scanner brought this up, but I've got enough mitigating controls, right? So I think you're right, Tim. We need to, I think the short-sighted leaders get rid of the specialists, but the companies that are doing well actually add more specialists. It's hard to find security people, right?
So let me bring this into the topic, the subject of platform engineering, and is that replacing DevOps, or is it complementary, or whatever it is. And the reading I've done about it, it's interesting that the rise of platform engineering in some ways comes from getting back to developer-friendly environments and developer productivity, and kind of taking all the stuff that we've piled onto DevOps and DevOps tools and all the people involved and all of this. It's kind of pulling it back to being and making them do security, as you're saying, Brock. It's like, let's kind of get back to the basics or the fundamentals that are going to help developers be more productive, but also that are more friendly to the developers. To me, it's kind of an interesting 180 counter reaction, maybe to where we are because of DevOps. And anybody agree, disagree, have a different viewpoint on platform engineering?
Let me see how I can say this. Most developers I talk to, aren't afraid of having more things put on them. In fact, they're not they're not sitting there saying, "Oh no, we've got to do security." No, what they're more interested in is, what tools do I have to help me do security? Because I know I need to worry about it. The best developers in the world already know what they're responsible for. They're responsible for everything. They just want the tools to help with that. One of the things I hear developers, if they complain about anything, the ones I talk to, it's about things, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but it's about things like low code, which come in and say, the types of low code that say, "I'll do all this for you. You don't need to do this anymore. Just trust me." And that's the sort of tooling that scares developers, because it's a black box. I don't know what this does. I don't know what it's going to do for me. I'm trying to take control of this, and this is taking control away from me. Yeah. The best tooling, the best platform engineering isn't the responsibilities are going up. It's, here's the tools to help you with your growing responsibilities that you already care about.
And let me be controversial.
Oh, please.
Sometimes, sometimes I feel a little bit that platform engineering is the safe of DevOps for some organizations. And here is why. Sometimes management is like, you know what? Let's just get one team that's going to worry about all the tooling and standardize it across, our enterprise, so our developers don't have to worry about what tools they're going to use, right? We're going to turn this into, a sort of a factory experience. But to Lee's point, developers like what they like. They have found tools that work the way their brains work. And now you have a platform engineering team, maybe in some organizations, coming in and saying, that's not the approved tool anymore. You need to use this one because this is what everybody else is going to use. Get on board, right? So it's that standardization can go too far. I know in large enterprises, you have, 11,000, 12,000, 15,000 developers. You have to figure something out. But, if it's done like a heavy hammer, I think that's the wrong approach completely.
You hit the nail on the head. It's actually a topic I talk about in the book is the idea of standardization versus choice. And it's a very, very, very hard line to draw. And ultimately, some of the worst organizations, if you will, draw a hard line one way or the other. Ultimate developer choice, whatever you want, the complexity is overwhelming. Or ultimate standardization, sorry, this is the tool you use no matter what, developers are out the door. The reality is, as you say, you have to give the developers the tools that they want to get their job done within the sandbox of guidance that is reasonable for the level of complexity that we want to allow in our organization. So I like the tool, the term sandboxing, right? Where you can say, here's the set of toys that we're playing with. And this is a changing size. You can bring toys in and we can talk about them, but this is the size of the sandbox. Within the sandbox, do whatever you want. And that sort of model, I think, helps a lot with this balance between choice versus complexity.
I think this gets to some fundamental psychology parts here too. But before I get into that, let me just talk about how is platform engineering defined by analysts, or what do we think about platform, right? The English word platform means to use as a foundation to build on top of, right? So the goal in removing or reducing some work from developers is all about reducing friction, right? Giving them more self-service, giving them things that, the organization has already done tests on this stuff, so perhaps you can use this. But then it gets to the psychological need. Developers, I agree with Lee 100%. They come out of just being a developer with the ethics of, I've got full accountability. It's my application. It's almost like my baby, and it's out there in production, and I want it to be the best thing since sliced bread. So they have the accountability from day one in terms of a mindset. Okay. But then when it goes as far as control, or if the engineering manager or upper senior layers above the developers that are actually putting code into systems, say, well, okay, I need you to control and be fully accountable with the sales of your application in the market, right? And that kind of accountability is put onto developers. Then the developer is going to naturally gravitate more towards control. Well, how could I be responsible for the business if you told me that I must use this stuff that's been intentionally encapsulated, so I don't need to understand and just use it, right? So I'm giving up accountability. So I think when people use platform engineering as a mechanism to say, I'm going to control what you do and remove choice from developers, then it's gotten too far. But when it's used to actually reduce work, again, back to the AI thing, right? It is taking work off of the developer, because that's where everything meets, right? In customer delight and achieving the functionality, the non-functional specs and everything, right? We're trying to spread out some of that workload. And I think that's where platforms can play very well, especially where developers don't want to worry about it and be accountable for things like security, plumbing. Okay, what service talks to one another? Well, what service is allowed to talk to one another? Is this data accessible from this system? Do I need to have data privacy tags around that data? Things like that if we can push down into the platform, then it does make us more productive. I mean, let's look at the rise of Kubernetes. Okay. A lot of people have complained that, oh, that's too difficult. Well, I think that's a bunch of farce. I can't think of a better word. It's just nonsense, right? It's developers or even operators that don't want to learn the fundamentals of distributed computing and systems engineering. Kubernetes and container platforms have just made it more simpler to solve that inherently complex problem. Right. So when people say, oh, this is a tough technology, it's actually, well, that's the power of platforms. Now there's a lot of things you're not worrying about, things that happen automatically in the platform that's taken care of for you, so you can focus on your business applications. So if you don't rob yourself of the learning opportunity, and you don't try to, have a control sort of mindset, then I think there's a lot of benefit in the power of platforms here.
So Parag, I'm going to push back on you on this one about Kubernetes being simple. Having been an early adopter of Kubernetes,
sure,
it's not simple. It's extremely complex. The CNCF and the startup landscape will testify to that, with all the people who are trying to make Kubernetes more simple, more approachable, more accessible. Kubernetes is not simple. It's extremely complicated. It started off simple, but it's not how we use it now. What we have now is not simple, and it gets more and more complicated as people try to use it for more and more and more, right? And that's fine, right? But there is a very, very large gap between understanding the concepts of containers and schedules and orchestration and its implementation, and Kubernetes does nothing to make that more simple. That all said, there is room for, in Kubernetes, the art of the possible, which is why I think people really go there. You can do a lot of stuff without having to write your own automation, because there's a platform for it. But it's a lot like, you can get from one place to the other by flying a plane, but flying a plane is not simple and easy. So I think within the DevOps community, I do think that the level of tooling around trying to make Kubernetes more approachable, kind of speaks to the complications thereof. But it doesn't mean that we're not rising to the challenge or whatever, but we are recognizing that it is in fact not great. I think it also leaves room for something else that is maybe a little less not great. But what that is next, we'll see.
I think of it as constant innovation. So as you innovate, it's never perfect, right? So you keep improving, you make things better. Like if you look at CNCF, there isn't a cloud native testing tool in the CNCF landscape, but there are 1,000 different logos on the CNCF landscape page, right? So yes, there's those fundamental gaps there. And so what companies do is they say, okay, I'll go fill this gap. Oh, I'll go fill that gap. And I think what you have is you have inherent complexity, spreading an application on top of a lot of compute, storage, and network infrastructure, and being able to rewind and replay what happened in production to go back and improve your application. I think there's just a lot of inherent complexity. If you look at DevOps as well, how many different DevOps technologies are out there today, right? There's hundreds of companies involved, and they're going at it from different perspectives, right? You have Git. There's multiple flavors of Git. You have build tools. You have places you store your build, right? You have image scanning tools, right? Continuous deployment, GitOps tools, right? So I think if there's inherent complexity, you're always going to need to keep evolving to make things simpler and simpler, lower friction, and it's a matter of the maturity of the platform. So I would say Kubernetes is not done yet. And I think there are customers, like if you were to say, how would I take an application and write it the same way such that it runs in any environment? And if everybody had to build their own mechanism to do that, you'd probably come out with very similar things that, we as an industry have developed.
Well, but not necessarily. Okay, so, there are different tools other than Kubernetes that accomplish the same thing. There's, for instance, ECS, which accomplishes a very similar set of problems, but in a much simpler way. But
in AWS,
the problem is that what Kubernetes does is Kubernetes gives choice and hence complexity. Yes. And what ECS does is it says it gives opinions and viewpoints and requirements, and therefore it's a lot simpler if you meet those requirements. But if you don't, it doesn't help you at all. So this comes back to the complexity argument again. You create your sandbox, and that sandbox gives you a level of complexity, and that's the way it goes. I think the problem with Kubernetes is they didn't put enough guardrails in place. And I think that's what some of these tools are doing, right? Some of these innovations that Tim is talking about, he's absolutely right, is they're trying to put some order on the chaos to reduce the complexity, rein in the complexity, and give some reasonable best practice guidelines for how to use it, and therefore at the same time make it simpler to use. Right? To say Kubernetes isn't overly complex, I think is false. I think it is overly complex, but there's a reason why.
There's a reason why, yeah.
Yeah, it's basically that thing that everyone it's started to become more and more lately, where everyone is like, what's the golden path, right, for the developer, right? And if you can find that, they don't necessarily have to stay there, but they have some guidance.
Yeah,
I always look at the great philosopher of engineering, Commander Montgomery Scott, who said, the more you overhaul the plumbing, the easier it is to stop up the drain, right? So Kubernetes doesn't eliminate complexity. It just changes where it is, right? And I think that's the thing. The things that what we do is complex. The things we're trying to do are complex. There's no way to make that simple, but there's a way to change where that complexity lies, right? But in so doing, right, now you change who's in charge of fixing it, which is a whole other thing.
That's right. It causes an organizational change potentially too.
Anybody that can invoke Scotty in the middle of it has my ultimate respect.
Oh, he's the ultimate DevOps
This seems
engineer.
like a conversation of, what two things can be true at the same time, right? There are some things that Kubernetes environment does simplify for you. It is also complex because, to your point earlier, Lee, about with great flexibility comes great complexity, to misuse Peter Parker's Uncle Ben's quote. So, one of the things
we have Scotty and we have Spider-Man both at the same time in the same episode. Okay. That's not bad, right?
And we had somebody mentioned a physicist earlier. I forgot who you mentioned, but
Neil deGrasse.
I was thinking about the developer and the standardization debate. There's sort of the Goldilocks area where there's enough standardization that you don't get rebellion from the developers. Right. But at a certain point, if you tip it too far into the standardization mode, it kicks in Newtonian physics for every reaction. Standardization is an opposite and greater reaction by the developers to say, screw this, I'm going to do my own thing if you're going to put those bigger guardrails. maybe I'll go look for it.
It's the stretched rubber band. As long as it's stretching, you're fine. The moment it stops stretching, that's when you have a problem.
Or someone built a new rubber band, right? Like gravitational physics comes along and Newton wasn't that accurate.
It does. So let's do this. We have just a few minutes left, so we have to have short, lightning round, short answers. What's the one thing you hope doesn't happen this year in DevOps? Like, please don't mess this up, or please don't go down this avenue. We've made that mistake before, or whatever you can think of. Whoever wants to jump in first.
I hope that in our race to AI, all the things, and store all the data for AI, that we don't forget that there is a ecological cost to what we do. The computers that we use to do AI and the amount of cycles we use to store all the data do cost, not just money, but also energy. And I feel like if we get so wrapped up in trying to predict all the things, that we may be predicting our own demise.
Sustainability. Great. Who's next?
I'll go next. Keeping on the AI theme, I hope we don't focus too much on the word intelligence in AI and depending on this artificial a little bit more. In other words, I think let's believe less hype and more reality for what AI truly is, which is less than what the hype says it is.
Nick.
I guess I'll add, as technologies evolve and DevOps continues to grow, I would say keep doing that. Keep the movement. I know there's a lot of a myth that this is dying, or even this will be replaced by some other new thing out there, or you will be replaced. Don't give up what you've been doing. If you look back over every decade, there's significant progress, and then in that process, don't use technology to keep you to stop you from continuously learning, right? So if we build platforms that become better, that do have the guardrails that we want, that make things easier, have less friction, don't use it as a tool to say, I don't need to understand what that platform does. Use it to empower you, but don't use it to keep you stupid, if you will, if I can say that. And never neglect operations. And I think since the dawn of applications running anywhere, whether in cloud or on premises, or for small customer groups or for the entire world, billion population, we still struggle to keep applications running and delighting customers. So think about that up front, security and operations, and use the power of the platforms to help you get there. And know the platforms are not going to be perfect, as people said on the call. And it takes a long time to evolve standards and get people to agree. Just don't give up hope.
Hope. Speaking of hope, you get the last word.
Yeah.
Hope.
What I hope doesn't happen, and that's pretty tricky. I like it. Is I hope, if we think about where we are in the economy, the layoffs, everything that is happening, and, the potential, gloom that's on the horizon, I feel that developers in some organizations are starting to seem more like commodities than people. So I'm hoping that concept where people think about the 10x developer, they continue to realize these are actually people who are part of your organization. They do a good job and they are critical, but it just feels like there's a little bit of commoditization starting to happen in some organizations. And I would like for that to not become more widespread.
I think it's a great note to end up on. Thank you all. Thanks to all of our panelists today. Where are we heading in 2023 with DevOps? I think we had a lot of paths that we explored, and I'm sure some will come true and some won't. Will evolve. So thank you to our panelists. It was great to have you, Parag, Lee, Tim, and Hope. And thank you to Tricentis for being such an amazing sponsor and working with us in creating this great programming coming to you on Techstrong TV on DevOps Unbound. Hope you'll join us in another episode. Please check out Techstrong.tv for more episodes of DevOps.com and DevOps Unbound. And we will have live roundtables too. So be sure and check out Those are available on the website. You'll see us under the webinar section. So take care, everybody. Thank you all.
Take care.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, everybody. Mike Rothman here from Techstrong Research. I'm here with another Techstrong TV interview. This time we have our pal Tom Tovar, who is CEO of AppDome. We're going to chat a little bit about mobile security. And, it's like, listen, everybody has these things. Oh, you can't see it over my background, but maybe if there you go. Everybody's got our mobile device. We've got hundreds of apps that go on there. Again, they did some interesting research in terms of, kind of what folks' expectations are relative to mobile security. They've got a pretty interesting kind of option to help you build mobile security into your mobile apps. So again, it'd be a great conversation there. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Techstrong TV. Tom, why don't you introduce yourself, a little bit about AppDome so we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks for having us. Thanks for having us on the program, and hello to everyone out there. Appreciate everybody who's on the journey to protect mobile consumers and mobile apps better, and look forward to sharing what we've learned and trying to make the mobile community safer and more secure for everyone. A little bit about AppDome. So we're a defense automation platform for mobile app security. So our product sits inside the CI/CD workflow and helps mobile developers deliver on the cyber objective without any code, without any SDK, and quickly and easily. We sit in the center of the mobile economy, and we protect a lot of apps out there. Probably a lot of apps, Mike, you and your viewers have on their phones today, and it's a pretty scary world out there. And I think we have a lot that we can share.
It is. So before we dive into that, I love the idea of it's a scary world, right? Because I've been doing security for 30-something years, and everybody goes, "Oh, is it that bad?" And I always say, if I told you, you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning, so I'm not going to actually tell you, what actually happens out there, just for your own protection from that standpoint. Yeah. So I totally get it. So let's dive into the study, right? So, you asked 25,000, consumers what their expectations were. What were some of the high level things that surprised you, Tom?
Yeah, so the first thing to note is that the mobile consumer is a very cyber aware and very tech savvy consumer. Globally, I think today consumers prefer mobile apps over the web experience, probably by a factor of 2 to 3 to 1. And I think we live that every day. I mean, if we're ordering food or buying products or, watching shows or sharing with our friends, or banking or trading or whatever, we're doing all that on mobile apps. And I think that trend is definitely going to continue. And I think the cyber community has done a great job of helping the consumer be cyber aware. So they're very keen on top topics, including security, fraud, malware protection, and things of that nature. So they're very astute in that. And that shaped their expectations about what they expect when they use a mobile brand or a mobile app to live and work in their daily lives. So a couple of the things that might interest your viewers is, there's always been this debate, Mike, around, if you're in cyber and you're working with dev or you're working with the product team, is what does the consumer want more? Do they want better features or do they want better security? And in that debate, the features have always won. The features have always won. If you don't have a great product, then there's not much to secure. So, hey, security always kind of took a back seat. But interestingly, in the survey that we did, it actually came out, the consumer basically said, I treat security and features equal. And in some cases, particularly for those mobile apps that I use on a regular basis, or those mobile applications that have a high transactional value. So think financial services, think retail, things where I'm purchasing things. I actually value security higher than I value additional features. So that was a mind blower to us.
Yeah.
That said to us,
that's one of those things. I'll tell you, Tom, I've been doing this a long time. I'm not sure that one passes the sniff test. I'm not challenging your data, right? It sounds, counterintuitive to,
it's great. I mean, look, it's definitely an eye opener. I agree with you. One of the things that I've said to CISOs around the world is think about this, is that what it's saying is that for the first time, at a minimum, the consumer values what you're doing, and as a core part of the value proposition of a brand. Best case scenario, if our data is like 100% accurate and there's no like wiggle room in it, then it says they're on your side. Yeah. And so if nothing else, I think it's a very, very strong, kind of placeholder in the dialogue between cyber and product around, hey, should we release additional protections in the app? Should we be putting security front and center in our product? And the answer from consumers seemed to be yes.
Well, I mean, you look at how Apple positions the iPhone, right? And that's, I mean, security and privacy. I mean, that is a cornerstone of, kind of Apple's, kind of brand equity in their brand position. So, clearly there's something to folks being concerned about it more than a fancy feature. I don't know. Right. So I think that one, as a security person who's been fighting this battle for a long time, I'm ecstatic. Right. I mean, if folks are starting to get it, that they're going to start picking and selecting, some of their applications and what it is they consume based upon their perception of security, that's fantastic, right? It also means we're going to see a lot of, I guess, security washing, right? For lack of a better term, where folks will just, kind of play around and say, oh, we do security and, pay lip service to it, which I think a lot of folks already do. But I'm ecstatic to hear about that. So what other cool data points did you have?
Well, I think you touched on another very important topic there, which is this kind of, how do I say it, in name only kind of defense, right? Consumers go a bit deeper. So the kinds of things that top their agenda when they're thinking about, okay, when I'm using a mobile app, what do you expect from the developer? So we asked them questions like, do you want your data protected, your login protected, your credentials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they're clearly well beyond data and login. Like data and login are like table stakes. Like you can't have a mobile application or claim to have a mobile brand without data protection and login protection and credential protection. That's kind of table stakes. But a huge percentage, and we're talking, like huge, you've jumped 255% year over year, is around fraud and malware prevention. Like consumers have become very, very aware that their devices, even Apple, same for iOS and Android, are not safe environments to be transacting business, and they expect the developer, the brand who's delivering that application, to include more than the basic level of protection. So that was big. So we saw other threats like kind of I call the classics, like man in the middle and right. Big database breaches in the cloud and stuff like that, really kind of declining. The security expectation of consumers become very personal and very, very, very centric to their own experience, right? What's on my device? What's on my app? Hacking tends to be really high, and fake apps tend to be really high. So Trojan applications are very high in the users' consciousness. Interestingly, we threw in a wild card because we didn't know what it was doing. We threw in a wild card in the question, and the wild card was, what about a developer that doesn't care about my security? Like, are you afraid of that? And they actually ranked the developer who doesn't care about my security as high as they ranked fake apps and malware. Like they put that on par. So again, it was this other kind of side of the coin, which you and I were talking about just a second ago. Do they really care? Well, it turns out when they're evaluating the developer doesn't care is as bad as a bad person attacking them. Yep. So that was very interesting. I thought that was critical. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I do, only because it's kind of one of those things where if folks have started to make that jump between what's on their devices to the actual company and or developer that provides it. I mean, we've been trying to get, some type of liability or culpability for issues in applications for a long time, right? There's no liability. It's really difficult to see a legislative environment where that, kind of thing could happen. So you have a bunch of folks that are doing, shoddy work without any kind of, consequences to what they do and what they put at risk, for the consumers and for the customers, even for big businesses out there. So if again, without that kind of legislative, cudgel, if we're able to make that connection to if the developer and the company representing that developer isn't, kind of saying the right stuff, isn't doing the right stuff to protect data, to protect consumers, we're not going to do business with them. I mean, Darwin works in magical ways, right? And, they're going to figure it out that if kind of Mr. Market or Ms. Market says you can't prosper if you don't take this stuff seriously, I think that benefits everybody. But again, I'm an old cynical security guy, so I love the data. I just, kind of need to see it before,
let's talk about that. Let's talk about that notion of consequence and prosperity kind of side by side. So we also ask consumers about churn and about advocacy. And so this one, if anything's going to shock you and make you smile as a cyber professional, what I'm about to tell you is going to really, really kind of help you. Now, the first thing I'm going to start off with is the side that's not going to shock you. Okay. The notion that when bad things happen, more bad things happen. So, we ask consumers, so what if you found out that your mobile application didn't protect you, right? How likely are you to abandon the app, abandon the brand, et cetera, et cetera? Okay. You didn't experience an attack. Nothing bad has happened to you. You just found out through word of mouth or, social media post or whatever, that something, whatever happened. So 67.9% consumers said, I'd get rid of the app. I'd go find an alternative. I'd whatever, right? So not shocking, right? Bad things happen. More bad things are going to happen. Then we asked them, okay, so what if you actually experienced a breach or an attack, right? And you were not protected from? Are you likely to abandon the app, tell others not to abandon the app? Are you going to engage in cancel culture, that kind of thing, right? And the answer was absolutely, but the margin was only slightly higher. So that was like 73.2%. So you had 73.2% versus 67.9%.
Yeah.
Not a lot of difference between a perceived attack and an actual attack affecting them. In both cases, a big percentage is going to leave. But here's the showstopper. Here's the one that's more interesting. What if, we said, the developer stopped that attack, okay, and you were aware that they stopped that attack? In other words, in the user experience, the developer demonstrated that they stopped an attack for your benefit. Okay, how likely are you to advocate that app, promote that app, etc.? Okay, 93.8% said we will advocate for that brand. We will give that brand 5-star reviews in Google. We will promote that brand on social media. And a very large percentage, I think it's something like 24.4%, said they would actually become full-on brand advocates for that brand in social media. So not only is it good business to add cyber, but it's actually good business to add cyber to the value proposition.
No kidding. So, my first thought was, all right, I'm done with this Techstrong thing. I'm just going to become a marketing agency to go promote, kind of protective, activities on that to companies, because that seems to be a gold mine if it's true. Well, so that's great. The data is great, Tom, but I do want to make sure that we take a little bit of time and talk about some of the constraints to actually building security into your mobile environment. I know that's something that you guys at AppDome, really focus on, because that's always been the excuse, right? It's hard. I don't really understand it. I don't, I can't make it in. I've got to prioritize features. So explain a little bit about what you guys do to really facilitate that with a lot of the app developers out there.
Yeah. So the first thing, there's two components to that. There's the threat landscape, and then there's the operating environment that you have to kind of deal with. So on the threat landscape side, you have to consider that the mean time to first attack for a mobile application that's released onto a device is around 14 seconds, which means that the primary delivery vehicle of an attack is malware sitting on a device already, right? And as your user base grows, the mean time to first attack actually drops. So it can drop as low as 137 milliseconds. Like it can drop like very, very fast, and that's just because you're spreading the app out over a large universe where there's more malware, installed. So the primary delivery vehicle in mobile is going to be an automated programmatic attack that doesn't go away, right? It's not hackers in a garage with a hoodie and eating pizza. It's actually automated programmatic attack. So you gotta understand that. And there's also an economy around building these exploits and malware that's out there. So things are constantly changing. So that's the threat landscape. But also inside your operating environment, you've got hundreds of developers, maybe thousands of developers who are building these incredible, beautiful, rich mobile app experiences, and they're changing that application constantly, right? So they're releasing the application 48 times or 96 times a year. And you've got the operating systems that are changing likewise, every month, new releases, whatever, and every Android device changing its operating system as well. So the reality of trying to get this thing out is one of rapid iteration, rapid change, right? And broad, large scale deployments across millions and millions of devices, all with different, operating profiles and so forth. So if you're a cyber professional, you've got to accommodate that. So what AppDome did is we created a platform, we call it Defense Automation, that basically takes all those changes into account when the developer is building the app. So as the developer is creating the application in their DevOps pipeline, however they change it, whatever language they use, whatever they add to it, you have an automated system that accounts for that and adds the security that the cyber team needs and that you need to pass regs or compliance or whatever, adds that in the build process so the dev team can stay on track, meet the consumer demand, and accommodate all of that change. So ultimately, that's the main thing you got to deal with. You got to deal with the pace, the diversity, and the change that happens inside of a mobile release lifecycle
without adding a lot of friction to the developers.
Exactly, and you can't change the way the dev team works. I mean, again, the data is amazing, but the practicality of delivering on a mobile brand is the same. Dev team has to have the freedom to deliver the mobile application. And the cyber, I'll give you something I've said to CISOs around the world. I've been in cyber like you for 25 years. We have spent our careers trying to teach cyber best practices to the dev team. Okay. It's our time to bring dev best practices into cyber so that we can deliver in the manner that dev deliver cyber solutions in the manner they're delivering the app. So it really is time for us to flip the script on ourselves and use some of the automation, system level control, velocity, etc.
On integration points and not expecting folks to do unnatural acts in order to protect.
Exactly. So that's what we provide, and we give people insight into the real attacks that are going on in the wild, give them an XDR component so they can see it, solve it, prove it, in the wild. And, we're just having a blast. I tell you, my joy, and I think you hit it right at the top of this segment, is looking down on my phone and seeing the brands that I love and knowing that the company and the product that our team has created is protecting those brands and protecting me when I use them. That's my joy.
Then hopefully we're more joyous in the future. Yeah, so great. Tom Tovar, thanks for being on Techstrong TV. Really appreciate it. How do folks get in touch with you guys? If they want the survey report or just to learn a little bit more about integrating.
Yeah, just go to appdome.com. There's plenty of links you can follow and you can explore what we do, all the different protections that we offer, and you can pick up a copy of the report. It looks like this. We also have country-specific reports, like for the UK, for Colombia, for US, for all of the different countries that we surveyed. So you can compare the country-specific data to the global data and see what suits for your brand.
Good. That's great. So check it out, appdome.com. Tom Tovar, again, thanks for being on the show. And let's send it back to the studio for our next segment.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, everybody. Mike Rothman here, Techstrong Research, for another episode of Techstrong TV. Today, we're interviewing Chen Bersan from Skyhawk Security, new company. They actually spin out from Migra, but actually, I don't want to, kind of steal his thunder, right? So Chen, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you, Mike. How are you? Thanks for having me.
You bet. I'm doing great. So why don't you kind of run everybody through Skyhawk and the story? You got spun out from Radware and generally, kind of what area of the security space you're really targeting.
Right. So thank you, Mike. So Skyhawk Security is a spin-off from Radware. The company was operating as a unit within Radware for the last 4 years. It's been very successful in addressing basically runtime protection for customers in the cloud, basically the CDR space, the cloud threat detection and response space. And with the success the division had within Radware, the company decided to make a bold move and basically make a spin-off of the company so that we can give it more focus and attention and grow it. I was brought in as CEO based on my background. I was GM and site manager for Dome9 in Israel, which later got acquired by Checkpoint. So I've been in this space before it was even called CSPM.
I know. You're just playing around with firewall rules to open it up before it was even CSPM, man. I remember. You bet.
Correct. And basically created this market category that now evolved into CNAPP. And we are on target to revolutionize this market again with our CDR.
No, that's great. So, CSPM is something that everybody kind of thinks they have, and some use it, some, again, Microsoft and AWS and, Google and these guys are increasingly, kind of bundling it in. So it's perceived to be a bit of a commodity at this point, right? I mean, absolutely critical because misconfigurations are really what will kill you, kind of when you get into scaled cloud ops. So, having somebody look at that and applying those policies are absolutely critical. But what's different about what you guys are doing? It's not just run of the mill, like, hey, we're going to connect to your cloud account and tell you, kind of what's misconfigured and have you fix that. You're going beyond just that general set of analysis. Is that right?
Correct. And the statement is spot on. I really think that CSPM is commoditized. That's part of the reason we actually announced our CSPM as a part of the freemium version of the product. We actually give it for free up to 1,000 assets. Because we really think it's a baseline capability today.
Let's dig into that for a second. I'll let you talk about CDR and the machine learning stuff in a second. So let's talk a little bit about the freemium, kind of CSPM. So supports a variety of cloud platforms, or is it just AWS?
Support a variety of cloud platforms. We are adding and extending all the time. And we basically give it really free. It's not a free trial, a free with a footnote. It's really free functionality, basically covering compliance, reporting, alerting on misconfigurations and posture management.
So no restrictions, not, no grayed out reports. You see those where you get 2 reports and 20 are there and you can't touch them. And it's kind of like, so really free. Okay, that's interesting.
It's really free. And the reason it's free is exactly the reason you mentioned. We think that it's commodity and it's time to basically go beyond CSPM and beyond posture management, and in a sense, even beyond risk management to runtime protection. Our customers are telling us that even with risk management in place and even with the best risk management in place, they still have to prioritize. They cannot fix everything. They have to accept some level of risk. And with that level of risk, get in runtime protection that allows them to actually make sure they close this gap, still enjoy agility, enjoy the speed of, the speed that the cloud enables their development, their core business, and go to market that way, with us basically bridging the gap between risk and actual threats.
Yep. So let's dig into that a little bit more. So you get telemetry via APIs from the cloud platforms. right? You analyze that, or you aggregate it first, right? Kind of do your policy checking on, kind of the configurations. That's, kind of the typical CSPM stuff. And then you're doing some math on it, right? Is that right? So you're doing some math to kind of identify what could be malicious types of activities based upon your own research team. Is that, so you've got your own folks that are looking, for those patterns and building that into the system?
Right. So we do basically two things. Obviously, we take the configuration data, which is context for us to know what we're analyzing. The second thing we do, which is key, it's basically taking all the data, all the logs data, whether it's network logs, flow logs, access logs, audit logs, DNS logs, right? There's all sorts of indicators we're taking from the cloud all over. And our platform is really a data hub. So we're getting all the data, and then we're employing two levels of machine learning on that. The first one is obviously the basic anomaly detections capability. The second, which is key, is basically another layer of machine learning that allows us to build our sequences. They can be mapped into the Meteor framework. They can be so that we can relate them to a real techniques that are being employed, or just dealing with unknowns. But the moment we see a correlated set of events that are forming what might be perceived as an attack, we then issue an alert, right? And that's why we are able to give our customers an extremely accurate feed of alerts, which we call them real alerts, by the way, in order to make sure that there's no alert fatigue and there's no false positives. And what they get is really accurate and explainable with a visual presentation, allowing them to actually see how the attack evolved, how the attacker moved, the lateral movement in their environment, what they did before they get to the condos.
Yeah. So how much of kind of the customers you're working with, how much of their issues are those misconfiguration stuff versus real attacks? Are you guys seeing real attacks on the cloud? And I don't mean, somebody going in and, busting in and spinning up some, crypto mining stuff. I mean, yeah, that's important, but guard duty should catch that, or else we're, kind of screwing something up on that front. But like real attack where people are kind of doing it, pivoting and kind of really trying to burrow into, kind of a cloud environment. Do you see a bunch of that?
So we see a bunch of it. Obviously, this is not extremely prevalent, right? It's not happening every day, but we see it. And we see it with customers, and we hear from customers that we are able to block events in their environment, and they are able to actually understand what they should do in order to prevent future events. So this is actually another key point. It's a feed into the CSPM, right? Once we see events, we can feed them into the prioritized CSPM to allow them to actually deal with the real risk and not with a theoretical risk.
Yep. Yeah. And that's because that's always been the case. Just, and typically when you do see that type of attack or activity, it tends to start because you've got an overprivileged environment, or you didn't lock down a network, or all that stuff you did in the old shop, right? Kind of went from networks to IAM to all those, because that tends to be where, it's what's hard, right? Especially doing it at scale. That stuff is really hard to operationalize.
Correct.
So.
Correct. And you really touched on another key point, which is our ability to correlate between these different layers, right? The network, the identity, all these different layers combined into a single story, because it's never about just ITDR or identity or just network. It's spanning all over, and that's why we are so unique in our ability to correlate these events in multiple layers into a single unified story.
Yeah. So what do you call that? I was having an argument with somebody the other day. And I grew up as a networking guy, right? So, 35 years ago, I was just, kind of plugging in thicknet and trying to figure out how to do, all that stuff. And again, I know most of the audience is gonna be like, what is this old guy talking about? But we were talking about, kind of what do you call this? And they used the term attack path. Right. An attack path, to me, that's a network. And again, that's just the way I think, right? Because that's kind of how I grew up. I think about, I'm going to break into this, and then I'm going to do that. And if I can block the network side of that. But then I kind of took a big step back and I said, well, it kind of is an attack path. Is that the vernacular you guys use, or is there other, kind of ways you describe what that that, kind of series of events, turns out to be.
So we call them the sequence of events or the sequence of the attack, right?
Yeah.
But many of the industry veterans are still calling it attack path, and we are trying to find our customers where they are, and then get them closer to us. So we will use these terms interchangeably.
Yeah. And to me, that's the hard thing, right? Building that timeline, because when you're really trying to do a response, it's really all about, understanding the timeline, figuring out, kind of what was breached and, was anything exfiltrated and all of those, kind of things. So sequence or timeline, that made more sense to me than path. But again, I'm an old guy, and I think it, when something breaks, I'm like, did you check the wire? Mike, there are no wires anymore. Right. So that's, those are the conversations I have to have with my ops friends now.
There's no wire, and there's actually no perimeter, right?
There's no perimeter. That's right. It's all up there in somebody else's environment. So discovery and data management and all that, that's another rat's nest that I don't know we want to go towards on this front. But no, that's exciting with the freemium stuff. And so how many people in the company now, Ken?
We are 50 people in the company.
50 people. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a decent operation, and really cutting edge technology. We have here a research team, a data science team, obviously our engineering team, a lot of interesting pieces of technology that are actually enabling us to provide this capability. That really, from my perspective, is the next step. We talked about it earlier, that I've been in this industry for a very, very long time. When I saw this technology, it was very easy to see the innovation here and how this is like creating the next generation and the next advancement in this field.
So how do you, so are you focused only on kind of the cloud infrastructure side of things? Are you digging into containers? Are there are obviously a lot of PaaS services that are available and kind of fused into the clouds, whether it's, managed managed Kubernetes or, kind of CDNs and WAFs and all that. Are you digging into that pieces of it too?
So we're digging into Kubernetes as well, obviously. And it's almost, even though, we're talking about cloud, it's eventually containers are there everywhere, right? So we obviously double down there. Looking on our roots, right, coming from the hardware team, it only makes sense for us to also take network perimeter and all the amazing products that hardware is producing around WAF and DDoS, and take this telemetry in as well, which is also key. And I want to emphasize again, we look on ourselves as a hub of telemetries from all sorts of sources. Some of these are things we're working on right now, and we'll probably talk about them in our next interview on how we're taking more feeds to make the story more complete and with an even better view into application layers and some of the other layers that are required to really provide this end-to-end story. So there's more coming.
Stay tuned. That's the message, Ben? Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. There's more coming.
Always more, right? We always got to keep pushing the bar forward. That's the whole thing. And I started a company to do CSPM like 8 years ago at this point. So, that's a market that's near and dear to my heart too. But also, I'm pragmatic about the fact that it is, pretty commoditized, and good to see it moving in direction both deeper, right, in terms of, some of these managed services, but, also, multi-cloud and being able to kind of start to analyze some of the activity to find attacks, because that's really what it's about at the end of the day.
Correct. And we know that most of the customers are going to be multi-cloud, right? It's like today multi-cloud it's not just one cloud with another cloud in the lab. It's really multi-cloud. So
it is. Speaking of which, we're going to release a new survey that we have. We just did a pulse meter as well, which is one of our other, kind of infographic research products. And it shows that, kind of a bulk of, over 50% now have multiple clouds, and that's just going to grow from here. So that's definitely something that we're going to continue to see. Well, that's great. Ken, how do folks get in touch with Skyhawk?
So basically, through our website, there is a form to request a free CSPM version. Go there, link on it. We're excited, very, very looking forward to have customers subscribing to our free CSPM and then going forward with us in the journey to use our runtime protection, which is really where we shine compared to everything else out there.
Okay, that's great. Well, listen, Chen, I really appreciate the time. Thanks for being on Techstrong TV. We'll look forward. Go check it out. CSPN for free. Oh my goodness, CSPN for free. So go do that. And again, I may hold you to it. Right? You alluded to another interview at some point in the future. So would love to have you back on the show. Just reach out and let us know when we can chat some more.
Looking forward to it.
All right.
Thank you very much for having me.
You bet. Well, we'll send it back to the studio now for our next interview.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Winter driving can be challenging for even the most experienced motorists, but new science and technology innovations are making it easier to navigate this season's harshest weather conditions. Joining me now is Dr. Heather Reeves, a research scientist at the University of Oklahoma who is working collaboratively with the National Weather Service on these innovations. Dr. Reeves, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're happy to have you on Techstrong TV. If you could tell me a little bit about yourself and a general overview of the work that you're doing.
Great. So I'm a research scientist and I'm a meteorologist by trade, and I've gotten very interested in how weather impacts the transportation sector. And as a result, I started working on that, and now I lead a team of researchers, of other passionate people about this same topic. And so we're interested in things like weather impacts on the aviation sector, on road transportation, then also on marine transport as well. So these are the types of things that we do, and we develop decision support tools. By decision support tools, I mean these are tools that lead the meteorologist from the point of here's the weather to here's the impact the weather's likely to have on people and their day-to-day decisions.
That is so important because a lot of us do hear about the weather, but people don't know how to apply it, especially in business. And I understand this is a new technology that you've been working on, determining road conditions and predicting them as well, because as we know in meteorology, there's a big difference when you have temperature fluctuation, whether a road is going to be freezing or just a little bit slick. Can you talk more about the technology that you've been working on to determine these changing factors?
Yeah, road temperature is really the critical linchpin in whether or not you're going to have snow or ice accumulate on the road, or if it's snowing and the road temperature is above freezing, it'll start to melt, but sometimes it just turns into slush and you still lose traction that way. Sometimes it melts completely into rain. So this is really important information for decision support. And should the roads be plowed? What kinds of treatment should go on the roads? We started researching this topic by looking at actual road temperature observations. So some state DOTs embed thermometers in the road pavement itself. So we know what temperature those roads are, at least in those places. And we discovered that there's a lot of spatial and temporal variability in whether or not the roads are sub-freezing, this critical decision point. Are they sub-freezing? You can have one lane of traffic where the road is above freezing, and then in the opposite side of the road, the opposite direction, maybe it's below freezing because there's different amounts of traffic or shading, or there's something about that side of the road that's different. So we worked use these observations in concert with other data that we had to create a probabilistic tool. So this gives a probability that the road temperatures are sub-freezing or that they will be sub-freezing, as opposed to trying to make a deterministic declaration of it is or it isn't. That way, the forecaster can use their best judgment and say, in this circumstance, I think we need to be more conservative. I'm going to message a more conservative outlook, or I don't think we need to worry today, so I'm going to message a more optimistic outlook to my stakeholders.
Can you explain a little bit more about the technology behind these tools and how developers really began to break it down to make these determinations?
Yeah, we use like I said, the road pavement thermometers. We use data from that over several years to do what's called machine learning. Machine learning is just a big pot where you just dump in the relevant data and then you allow the computer to figure out, make all those teleconnections of how these various things connect to each other and may result in a certain outcome. So the particular tool that we use is called a random forest, and a random forest provides us with a certain number. I think we had 100 members in our forest, or 100 trees, if you will, in our forest, and each forest gives a binary prediction of yes or no, the road is sub-freezing, and then across this entire forest of yes or no decisions, then we declare a probability. If 50% of the trees say the road is sub-freezing and 50 say it's not, then it's a 50% probability.
That's really interesting. Were there any challenges that you faced along the way when using machine learning to come up with these probabilities?
Yeah, data curation is a big problem for machine learning because the old proverb of garbage in, garbage out for computer science certainly holds when it's applied to machine learning. So going through and figuring out whether or not those road temperature observations are robust was a real challenge for us. It's common for these things to become uncalibrated, and we needed to figure out whether that was a problem or to just start reporting some bizarre observations or to be damaged during snowplow snow removal efforts. And so just going through and figuring out when is this observation good and pulling them out so that we could train with robust data was a real challenge.
Was there anything that surprised you in this work? I think that as a meteorologist, you're certainly experienced in forecasting these conditions, but as you took a deeper dive into this project and implemented the machine learning, is there anything that you found that you thought, wow, I never thought that it would show this in terms of the modeling?
Yeah, I really, we started looking at the output from this predictive model and comparing it to what was happening. And we were running it in what's called an analysis type capacity. So it wasn't really a forecast. It was, this is what it is right now with all the information we have. And is what it's telling us consistent with what we see when we look at traffic camera? We love looking at traffic camera pictures in our team. We look at it every week. We're looking at traffic camera pictures. What do we see with our eye versus what is the artificial intelligence telling us? And the thing that captured our attention is the frequency of events where we're still seeing something happening on the road in spite of the fact that the road or the probability of the road being sub-freezing is near zero. So we expect the road temperatures are above freezing, but there's still some apparent accumulations. We actually had that here in Norman, Oklahoma yesterday. The road temperatures were quite warm, but we had this snowfall here, a snowstorm, and these were enormous snowflakes. I've rarely seen snowflakes this big, and I grew up in Michigan. So these are just monstrous, some of them 1 to 2 inches in diameter, these large aggregates. And we were starting to see slush accumulate even on the highway outside my office window. And I think that's simply because of the nature of what was falling. There was a lot of it. And these are really big flakes, which take a little bit more time to melt. They have a lot of air around them, so they're well insulated. So the frequency of that and the importance of that was something I hadn't fully appreciated until we got into this project.
That is so fascinating. I wonder if machine learning can pick up those variations, like large size snowflakes that are somewhat unusual, that you wouldn't see them as large as you were saying in everyday storms.
Well, that's an interesting idea, Bonnie. We haven't looked into that particular thing because this is just if the road temperature is above or below freezing, and it's not telling us anything about what's falling on the road. But
That's
now that you mentioned it, I think that's a good idea for research, is to see, can we get some idea about the character of the snow? How big are these snowflakes? How are they partially melted by the time that they're hitting the road? That might be an interesting application.
Yeah, absolutely, especially if you're looking at the temperature at different levels of the atmosphere. as a data point to put in there. But it's amazing the work that you've done so far. You mentioned that this is going to be looked at by Department of Transportation for different cities, probably where this is a bigger issue in northern cities where we have that freezing mix, and those temperature variations can make such a difference in terms of not just the everyday commute, but getting emergency vehicles where they need to be and not having the traffic slowdowns. Do you see this research that you're doing being implemented not just into the public sector, but into the private sector as well?
Yeah, right now we're targeting the National Weather Service, and how they disseminate that information will be up to them. They're very likely going to be disseminating the information in the form of messages, either telephone calls, chats, or graphics that they create, specially tuned for their stakeholders like state DOTs, public schools, and the like. But certainly this is something that could be licensed and used in the private sector.
And we talked about some of the tools that you're using. How do you see the API aspect of this?
Well, right now, this data or this tool is targeted for National Weather Service operations, and all of the National Weather, they're responsible for disseminating the data that they produce. Whether or not this will be produced and available to the public is a choice that the National Weather Service will have to make. I can't really comment on that. But
No
they
problem.
do disseminate a lot of things publicly. I just don't know if this one will, because we're right on the edge of the public-private partnership with this particular tool.
That's a really good point. Now, do you also use focus groups in your research?
Yes. In fact, last winter, we conducted several focus groups. These are with National Weather Service forecasters because this is their first exposure to this kind of a thing. And so we presented them with the tool, we presented them with the package or the software package in which it'll be embedded, and started asking them, where do you see the implications for this, or the points of application in your daily operations? When would you use it? How would you use it? What do you need in order to use it intelligently? And then we're hoping in out years to start involving other stakeholders in these conversations, like the partnering DOTs or emergency managers.
That is great. Now that we're in a new year and we're coming into the heart of winter, certainly, what are you working on now going forward as we're into 2023 with this project and with road sensors and the technology you were describing?
Well, now we're starting to target the next steps. The first step was, is the road sub-freezing or not? Now the next step is there something that's going to accumulate on it or not? And if so, what will it be like? If it's freezing rain, will I be able to see it, or will it be black ice? If it's snow, will it stay as snow? Will it melt? What will happen with it once it hits that road surface? Or if it's rain, has it rained lately? If it hasn't rained for a long time, you can have this accumulation of oil and silt on the road, and just that little bit of water, same thing as ice, can be very slippery. And so now we're getting to that point of decision. So now we have the information we need to know what will happen, and then now that we can say that, we can say, what should you do?
Well, Dr. Heather Reeves, thank you so much for your insight and your time as we navigate the roads this winter. We'll be thinking about this valuable research that you're doing with the University of Oklahoma and the National Weather Service, and how they'll be putting all this great information out there for people to stay safe. I really appreciate you joining me on Techstrong TV.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, stay with us. We're going to have a lot more news coming up.
This is Techstrong TV.
Designing data centers with sustainability in mind is a top priority for my next guest on Techstrong TV. Joining me now is Luke Kipfer, Vice President, Data Center Development and Construction for American Real Estate Partners and Powerhouse Data Centers. Luke, thank you so much for joining us on Techstrong TV.
Thanks, Bonnie. Glad to be here.
Well, tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into sustainable data centers.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, my background, I come from the trades. Right out of high school, I went to work for a mechanical contractor. So, I grew up in construction. I've been in the industry my entire life. And as I developed throughout my career, was able to see really some of the inefficiencies that are involved in design and construction. And what that has in terms of a carbon and a sustainability footprint through the entire life cycle of construction development. So it's really something that I've taken to heart, especially as Powerhouse has rolled out our new data center platform.
And what are some of the objectives and challenges in developing data centers specifically for the real estate industry?
Challenges are tough. There's a lot of constraints, especially for the data center market. What we call hyperscalers, the major players and developers in the game are moving very quickly. So they're looking to, optimize land usage. They've got the power density and requirements for sites have just grown exponentially over the past few years. And data centers as a whole it's a very new market, and it's moving very quickly. So it's being able to adapt to the compute needs that the biggest users have today, while still being able to do it in a sustainable and responsible manner.
Well, moving a little more deeper into sustainability, can you describe Powerhouse data centers and the unique technical real estate solutions that they offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're Powerhouse Data Centers. We're the technical real estate division of American Real Estate Partners, who's been a developer for over 20 years. Recently have moved fully into our data center brand, fully into its own separate platform, Powerhouse Data Centers. So what we do is we acquire land sites. We take care of all the utility coordination, entitlement, zoning, the design of the site development, and the construction. So what we do is we really do a top-down process when it comes to sustainability, starting very early, even in site selection, site planning, then going through design and construction, how we run our job sites, all the way over to how we commission our projects and turn them over to the end user.
Now, how does it work with the infrastructure masons? I understand there's been a recent announcement regarding climate accord and meeting those standards. Can you explain what that really took to make it happen?
Yeah. So Infrastructure Masons has been a professional association in the digital infrastructure market for some time. And they had 4 really key values, and sustainability was always one of those. In the past year, March 2022 is when they rolled out the Climate Accord. And that's really a specific action group to focus on sustainability within the digital infrastructure. It's several different, key focuses on that, but really it's transparency within the digital infrastructure market on what we're tracking, how we're building, and really putting together, common metrics so that as we're different developers doing the same task, we're tracking the industry in the same method. So we can really compare to see, 1, where we're at today, and 2, have a measurable difference moving forward.
Well, I'd like to break down some of the details in sustainability design for data centers. For example, one of the things I was reading about is how it starts with the trees. Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, no, I mean, it goes to the basics, right? So, when we're looking at site development, as land, especially in competitive areas like Northern Virginia, is getting tougher to find, there's no more easy sites to find and develop data centers. So, we're looking at sites that might have existing facilities that have to be torn down. We might be repurposing other facilities. There's not a lot of good, clear land to do that. So when we do with these things, we plan our development so that, we're preserving things like old growth trees, landscaping buffers between neighbors, really understanding that, we're trying to put a lot of infrastructure in a small area, but planning around our existing site conditions in the most, sustainable way possible.
And what kind of construction materials do you look for when you're designing these?
So specifically, what we control as a developer is the site development and the core and shell construction. So 2 major components of that are steel and concrete. So when we source our steel, we specify a certain amount of recycled steel needs to be used in that. And then that's been around for a while. Steel is one of the most widely recycled components in the world. So recycled steel has been around. The one place that we're really making a lot of headway is in concrete. Concrete excuse me, is, responsible 50 to 85% of embodied carbon in any building project. So that there's a lot of opportunities for sustainability improvements in concrete. So specifying a low carbon concrete is one way we're really able to, help build a more sustainable building. There's a couple different ways to do it, but really from our side, it's steel, concrete, and then our actual construction operations.
Do you ever come up onto any challenges, kind of getting everyone on the same page, construction, the material gathering, just the whole process, everyone being on the same page that we're going to do things a little differently maybe than we've done it before?
5 years ago, I would say the answer is definitely yes. And it's amazing how within this space, so many of our partners have pivoted so quickly. If 5 years ago, if we started an RFP interview response with sustainability, people would look at you funny. Nowadays, it's expected. It's not so much a spec that's buried deep within a document. Now it's front page. Now everybody's talking about it. So it's certainly been a really great shift within the digital infrastructure market. That it's not just us that is driving this forward. It's our general contractors, it's the subcontractors, it's the designers, it's the local municipalities we're working with. And then, ultimately it's really in our industry, the end users, the hyperscalers, our major clients that are driving these changes. But it's amazing the speed that everyone's been able to get on board and really buy into that. This isn't a fad. This is the way of the future, and these are the way things that need to move.
Do you find that there's a crossover since you've been in the real estate industry where we're talking about data centers, but have you found interest from the contractors, municipalities, and others that you work with that maybe we can apply these principles to other design projects?
Yeah, I specialize just in the data center space, but certainly, AREP, our real estate portfolio as a whole, has really shifted towards prioritizing sustainability. And yeah, certainly local municipalities, it's space planning has always been certainly, something that's been a hot topic. But, in terms of the entire sustainability picture of the project and the job site, they've done a great job with some of the local municipalities, working with them to be able to, advance our sustainability initiatives.
That's great. And now that we're well into a new year in 2023, where do you see trends going in terms of sustainability and data centers?
The one area I really think that needs improvement and will improve is the collaboration. Data centers as a whole, I don't want to call it a secretive industry, but every organization, every design team really feels like they had, the special sauce. They had the secret way of doing things, and it was better than everybody else. Where in reality, it was really a lot of separate organizations solving the same problem, potentially in different ways, and some of them more efficiently in different ways. So I really see, and this is one thing that the iMasons Climate Accord is driving, is collaboration beyond, between teams. So if I'm building a building, someone else is building a building down the street, someone else is building a building maybe in a different market, but we've all are moving towards the same sustainability goals and, facing the same sustainability challenges. So really coordinating our efforts and, working together as an industry versus, just separate organizations trying to solve problems is really going to help compound the efforts moving forward. And it's really going to speed up our move to prioritize that in the market.
Well, Luke, thank you so much for joining me on Techstrong TV. This is a fascinating topic, and it looks like we're going to be seeing more of these sustainable data centers in the future. I appreciate your time today.
Awesome. Thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, stay with us. We have a lot more Techstrong TV coming up.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
The great pleasure of being joined by Or Eshed. Or is CEO, co-founder with LayerX. Welcome, Or.
Thank you, Mitch. It's great to be here.
Good to be talking with you. Great topic, talking about security and browsers and interesting approaches. Before we get there, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about LayerX.
Excellent. About myself, I come from experience in browser security. So me and my co-founder, we met each other in our military service. We served together in the Israeli Information Warfare Unit. So we were researching anything malicious that we want to block on the World Wide Web, on the internet. And it brought us to expertise. We are talking about the days that malware, ransomware, those were the most interesting things, the top tier, the top notch. And web security was considered something basic because the browser is just for fun. The work is inside the perimeter. And over time in my career in information security, I saw again and again how companies get breached from simple phishing attacks or by a simple account takeover, things that happen on the web, very applicative. And it really bugged us, me and my co-founder. So we sat during COVID and we were thinking, what can actually be a game changer? And that's why we decided to found LayerX. Before browser security was a cool thing. And we realized that it is a workspace worth investing in. And we're trying to take the most out of it, but with our own approach. So LayerX is above like the 7-layer model. We want to be in the applicative world, in the modern use cases.
Well, let's explore this. I mean, sort of browser VPNs, that's kind of the hot thing at the moment, at least has been for a while. And there's a place for that too. Of course, we've lived in a world, I like you in browser security, cross-site scripting and SQL injection and all those things are still there, right? They haven't gone away. They're probably just as prevalent as vulnerabilities. But what's really, I think, changed the most is the level of sophistication of phishing and getting people to do things. The fake websites, look like your bank. They really look like your bank. It's hard to tell the difference. So I'm really curious about the approach that you're taking, the in-browser approach that you're taking for security. Why don't you describe that for us?
Okay, excellent. So I think it's actually not a trivial description. The browser is a very heavy application. It does really a lot. It takes a lot of JavaScript, a lot of web code, and renders it into an experience more than any other software in the world. Websites today, modern website single-page applications are more complex than software, on-prem software has been a few years ago. And it is impossible, any reverse engineer, by the way, will say, it is impossible to reverse engineer JavaScript because it's super obfuscated and complex. So the in-browser approach says, let's allow the browser to do the heavy lifting. The browser is compatible with the web, but there is a significant visibility piece that's missing that can be caught with an extension. This is what we do in LayerX. The browser decrypts the traffic, renders it, and we see the entire process. A poor analogy will be boxes and boxes coming from IKEA that are near to be your new kitchen. When they're in boxes, we have no idea what's about to be assembled. Even after you open the boxes, you have no idea how it will turn into a kitchen. So we see the entire process until we have the end result. And the browser is an all-powerful tool, but it allows much freedom for both the website and the user. So we are there to remember what the CISO wants in terms of risk appetite and only restrict the things and events that are risky in a block the list approach.
So talk a little bit more about, I like your IKEA analogy, right? Sometimes those instructions are weird
analogies, man. Because I was told you need to be able to explain it to your grandmothers. So I break my teeth every time trying to find a way because my grandmother, apparently she doesn't understand JavaScript.
She's not up. I had someone tell me, you need to make it grandpa and grandma simple. Sometimes that's pretty hard. Simple is hard, right? So tell us more about that because there's so many things of what we can look at that's happening within the browser, right? We can be looking at protecting from the kind of vulnerabilities that we talked about, but we also can be looking at the applications, the sites, the types of use cases that end users are performing. And I assume we're talking more of an enterprise security scenario. Is that the kind of use case that you're particularly going after?
Definitely. First of all, the enterprise security is much different than consumer security. Mm-hmm. Consumer security is just making sure that you don't download malware or lose your credentials. Enterprise security is taking the agenda, the risk appetite of the organization, and actualizing it into a policy in the browser. I'll give you one small example. Using a personal Gmail at work. Some organizations will say, no, we just disallow it entirely. Others will say we need the quality headcount. We need to allow them Gmail. But let's restrict them from downloading files. Let's see what they're doing that may be risky. Let's block the list in order to get the job done. So that's for us enterprise browser security. In terms of use cases, it's seeing how users consume SaaS applications, because today 80% of the work is on the web. Surveys show that about 85% of US companies and organizations are almost entirely browser-based. So applications need to be compatible with Chrome, Edge, and Firefox. We are also compatible with Chrome, Edge, and Firefox. Thus, we're able to provide governance on every application that's in the browser, seeing what kind of data goes up and down, files, and even in-app actions.
Talk about the data protection side of it. So there's the applications that we can use, maybe some of the functionality that we're using within them. Data protection is also a big issue when we talk about browser, because that's obviously a big place where that can leak from. Is that something you've worked on addressing yet?
Definitely. First of all, this is a huge use case, which is also one that CISOs that I talk to feel unsatisfied, because data security is here for many, many years, but it's not perfect. And what we provide is, in our approach, the last piece of the puzzle, seeing where data goes to. There is a huge difference between an application that is connected to your SSO, which is sanctioned, and you want to allow data to go up and down, and another shadow application that only one employee is using, maybe with a non-organizational identity. So we label all those applications, all those identities and account, and allow CISOs out of the box to decide what goes where in a very simple out of the box manner. By that, by the way, we're trying to achieve something that is very crucial in our point of view. If you use legacy solutions, you have two options. One, to sacrifice the business for security. That is, the CISO must approve each and every application before it's used. And that's a bottleneck that very few CISOs are willing to accept. The other alternative is full anarchy. So it's either dictatorship or full anarchy. And we want the middle path. We don't want to sacrifice neither security nor the business, especially in 2023, by the way. Being a business disabler is a very bad go-to-market. We want to balance things, and the ability to secure applications that you don't manage is very appealing to our customers.
Yeah, there's insecurity. If you push it too hard against end users, they will react the opposite, right? And then push back the other way. You kind of need that Goldilocks approach, somewhere in the middle where it's secure, but not so onerous for security. I'm curious. So what it seems like, because you're a plugin in the browser, right? So you could also work on devices that are not managed by the enterprise, which seems a great. In today's work from anywhere, that's a big piece of flexibility, I would think.
Yes, it is. And it's quite common. Eventually, it goes back to my example. More devices, more agility. You can be available off work hours, and eventually it happens. So in reality, some organizations choose to allow bring your own device. And those CISOs do it for not for a good reason. They know what they're doing. They want to allow the business to run ahead. So you can deploy extensions on non-corporate devices and turn a browser into a secure terminal. Without getting into deep details, our deployment is what we call an enterprise browser extension, which is quite different than a regular extension on the Chrome store. It just has more power. It is the equivalent of an EDR over the browser and can secure the browser no matter if it is on a managed device and an unmanaged device. And the beauty of it, we only need to be compatible with the browser. So any operating system that can have Chrome can have LayerX.
I was curious too. So when you do a plugin for the browser, is that going to be any interactions or activities within the browser? So all tabs within Chrome, you're going to have visibility into, be able to apply policies. So I might have my Chrome browser that I'm using for enterprise work, and I can go open Safari or Edge or something else to do my own stuff in that might not be managed by you. Is that accurate?
It is accurate. By the way, it's a great point because users are doing a mixture of work and non-work on the same browser, on different browsers, on the same identity sometimes. Sometimes they work on GitHub with their own personal email. Again, it goes back to the risk appetite. And sometimes the employee compensation website or terminal is using their personal email account. So which browser should they be using? Eventually, they have data moving in and out based on personal web activity and a work-related activity. Point is, we can see that in real time. Every tab is its own process. So what we bring is the ability to see what is the context of this tab, and then we enforce policies. To tell you a secret, it doesn't really matter if it's a different browser. 2 tabs in Chrome can be operated differently as much as Chrome and Edge can.
Okay. Yeah, they are truly independent within the browser. They're on their own process and space.
Yeah, it's on the task manager. There are different processes on the operating system.
Good point. Excellent point. So what are some things, when I first introduced security products into the enterprise, there was sort of this discovery of, I didn't know that was happening with my end user community. What are some of the typical things that enterprises would learn once they've installed LayerX?
So in terms of things that they find, the unknown unknowns?
Yeah, insights that they get that they may not have had before.
So usually there is the deployment of LayerX is on top of your existing ecosystem. So you don't have to encourage users to move to a new browser. So you just take them as they are, for the good and for the bad. So typically what happens that the organizations find out about a lot of shadow SaaS, not only shadow SaaS, but also shadow identities. Personal browsing activity, employees uploading work-related files to their own personal email. Maybe for a good reason, they want to work on it on the weekend. Still, it won't make you ISO compliant if that's allowed, no matter what the sentiment is. So they get surprised. I think that the mixture between personal activity and work-related activity are the ones that annoy them. I don't know if annoy is the right word, but keep them busy the most.
Concerning.
We see a lot of attacks coming from personal web activity, not only from personal web meals, but also from other applications and websites. Streaming websites, like illegal sports streaming in organizations, lead to malvertising. So attacks are coming from anywhere.
Yeah, we do live in a world of mixed mode in everything, right? And we're not always in the office. We're not always on the VPN. We're not always on a controlled environment, and not always on a corporate computer. Or even a browser that's managed by the company now. With a plugin approach, I can definitely see that advantage. So some folks can go to LayerX to your website, and can they download a trial? Is there some way they can check out your technology and your product?
So first of all, we're here and we are very responsive, and they can go on our website, contact us, and we provide a POC. They get their own instance. They can deploy it in their organization. Usually the feedback is, are you sure it's working? It didn't even restart the browser, which is what we want to happen. Mm-hmm. Then they get access to their own terminal. They get a lot of insights, a lot of visibility. And then they pick their own browser security journey based on their risk appetite, whether they like to restrict things or keep them open. They get a lot of visibility. A side note, recently, following the LastPass breach, we released to the community a free tool to mitigate or to find visibility into who is using LastPass under which context. And we gave it away for free because we think that as a vendor today, we need to prove relevance when things happen. And we had a lot of very positive responses, and the process is quite simple. We get great feedback from the community, so we're very happy for it. CISOs that POC the product eventually find a lot of value in the POC itself because it's actually a full GRC report. They know what's happening.
That's an important part of it too. We didn't even talk about compliance and reporting and attestation of that information that you need to provide, which is a whole nother benefit category. Well, or it's been fascinating to talk with you. Congrats on the product and the company. We're excited to see where you go with things and in browser and how this is adopted and where you take Layer X. So congratulations.
Thank you very much, Michi. It was very nice talking to you. And thank you for the audience for listening.
You bet. Hope you'll come back again soon. Oreshed, who is a co-founder and CEO with LayerX, layerxsecurity.com, by the way. So check it out.
So thanks for having me. My name is David Carter, and I head up the Infrastructure and DevOps Center of Excellence at Sapphire Ventures. Sapphire is a growth stage VC focused on the enterprise B2B SaaS ecosystem. We spend a lot of time kind of investing and researching and diligencing the DevOps market in particular. I head up Sapphire's Infrastructure and DevOps Center of Excellence, which is a dedicated function that supports the tech leaders in our portfolio with strategy guidance and partner connectivity and peer-to-peer community. My topic for today is all about autonomous DevOps. And my plan is to share a sort of state of the union of the emerging platforms and projects and companies that are really defining this notion of autonomous DevOps. And just forewarning before we begin, I went off the deep end a little bit for this talk with AI generated images. There's one on this page from DALL-E 2. Stylized a lot of the presentation using images generated from Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, and others. Part of the reason I did this is just because I'm a geek and I think these are really cool, really interesting graphics, but also because the ML that underpins these tools, things like GPT-3, which we'll talk about in a bit, are having a really major influence on the autonomous DevOps space. So just sort of some method to the madness there. Today, we're going to cover a few things. So we're going to cover off starting with an intro to the concept and just establishing some of the key terms, what we mean when we say autonomous DevOps. Then we're going to talk about some of the ingredients that are fueling this shift. Then I'm going to cover some of the more interesting and sort of novel capabilities that are coming to market across each phase of the SDLC. And then we're going to wrap with some current state challenges and some of the kind of future implications of the advancements that are being made across this space. So what do we mean by autonomous DevOps? So autonomous DevOps describes an approach to software delivery in which applications are built, deployed, and continuously maintained with little to no human input or intervention. I put little to in parentheses here because really the purest definition of autonomous would imply that there's no human intervention. However, I see this road as sort of a journey in a way, and many aspects of autonomous DevOps exist today. They're just not fully end to end yet, and so it's sort of a journey, and we're on our way, but not quite there fully. A reasonable analogy to this would be sort of the state of self-driving cars, right? There's a lot we can do there, but there are times where you definitely want to have your hands on the wheel. I put this word cloud at the bottom here. These are all terms that you may have heard of that can be used to describe this general trend. So I just added them here really just to level set and kind of keep us on the same page of what we're talking about today. So what is new here? What is fueling this sort of evolution to fully autonomous DevOps? Well, there's a few market conditions that come to mind. The first is around environment complexity, right? So simply put, developers need to know a lot of things these days. They need to know how to scale, how to orchestrate, how to debug. They need to do this across many languages, many runtimes, architectures, multiple cloud providers, doing all that while understanding how to defend against really sort of this ever-evolving attack surface. And orchestrating all that requires an understanding of different tools, different utilities. So I think you can see where I'm going with this, but suffice it to say, there's just the set of skills that an effective developer must comprehend these days is pretty overwhelming. And the goalpost is just constantly moving, right? There's always new tools to evaluate, an old one to deprecate, in a seemingly sort of endless cycle. The second condition here is around talent, and specifically talent constraints. So people are burning out, they're burning out due to some of the complexity that I just mentioned. There's influence through inflation and wage stagnation, which really isn't helping things. And, this is juxtaposed to the demand for developers, which has really never been higher. The Wall Street Journal reported 340,000 new technical job postings just this past January, which was up 11% year over year. And this increased demand is sort of inhibited by the burnout, right, which is still very high. I think, people will think of the Great Resignation as sort of a co-member. And a recent MuleSoft study suggests that, 90+%, the majority of CIOs say that the sort of trend of the Great Resignation is still drastically impairing their ability to hire and retain technical talent. The third trend is really one of technical achievement. So we've seen really a step change in the efficiency and power of machine learning models in just the last few years. This is driven in part by hardware improvements and just the availability of sort of massive amounts of compute from cloud providers. But perhaps most importantly, just significant advancements to machine learning and specifically like neural net architectures. The Attention Is All You Need paper in 2017 really started this sort of most recent wave with the proposal of the transformer, which allowed for more efficient training and greater parallelism. And that was the basis for OpenAI's GPT. And it just feels like every day there's a new kind of academic paper that's coming out where someone's figured out a new sort of novel optimization approach or a way to squeeze more efficiency out of these models. And so these advancements in AI ML are now being applied, really across every facet of the DevOps lifecycle. And me and a couple of my colleagues at Sapphire recently pulled together this landscape, this autonomous DevOps landscape, to help track some of the players that are kind of emerging across this ecosystem. The criteria that we used for this was to essentially highlight any company that's leveraging ML to power some aspect of the DevOps experience. The list is, it's probably not comprehensive. I'm sure we missed some folks here, but it's an overall pretty solid representation of the market and the types of functionality that we see in scope here. A couple things to call out. The first is that testing and AI ops, so AI for IT ops in particular, have some of the most vendors or entrants in this space. Those are two domains that have, for lack of a better term, sort of been at this the longest and really at the forefront of applying ML to the DevOps discipline. We see lots of new players here on this slide, but also lots of incumbents, many of which are starting to sort of acquire their way in. So, Tricentis, for example, acquired Testem, which is an AI testing platform. ServiceNow bought Loom Systems, which is an AI ops focused tool. And there's many, many other applications, examples of that. One other thing to note here is just what's missing. Specifically, we've omitted machine learning toolchain capabilities. So things like data labeling, feature stores, data quality tools, model deployment, model monitoring, et cetera. I call that out because we see those as really foundational to the advancement of ML in general, and super important to the advancement of autonomous DevOps, obviously, but just not particularly unique to DevOps specific use cases. So we didn't include those in sort of the scope of this landscape. And look, I know this is a bit of an eye chart. So what I'm going to do now is sort of drill down into each of these phases and highlight some of the more interesting and novel capabilities that are emerging across each of them. So starting with the design and plan phase, we have this quote from the Meta AI team at the bottom, which I just love. It says, "We believe that programming should become a semi-automated task in which humans express higher levels ideas and detailed implementation is done by the computers themselves." I just love this quote. It's actually several years old now. Satish Chandra and team at Meta are just doing some really amazing research around this space. If you haven't already read, I would recommend checking out their papers on neural code search and API recommendations and bug utility fixes with GetAffix. There's just really interesting work from that team. And I think this quote, the vision for it really starts at the design phase where you begin to express some of these higher level ideas. And so a few interesting capabilities that are emerging here. The first is around requirements analysis. So companies like ScopeMaster are using NLP to review requirements and user stories for duplicates, for omissions, for inconsistencies, and then to essentially recommend and make changes to these to make them clearer, and even go to the next step of providing delivery estimates based on the scope of the work to help sort of automate and optimize the requirements phase. At the design phase or the designing phase, you've got computer vision tools that are being used to transform a hand-drawn sketch into a design time artifact. So something like a Figma file. And then similarly, taking those files and actually being able to convert them into deployable front-end application code, all just essentially with a click of a button. And then finally, the auto refactoring space is super interesting. You've got monoliths, which are still very common, particularly with brownfield applications, particularly within sort of legacy traditional enterprises, larger enterprises that have been around for a while. Teams, look, they often endeavor to refactor monoliths into discrete microservices, but the process is complex and it takes a bunch of time and there's lots of perceived risks. And so it usually gets sort of put aside or delayed. And emerging companies like vFunction are aiming to sort of flip this on its head and really automate this process. So they're in particular using machine learning to scan source code and identify and recommend sort of natural breakpoints with which the application can be decomposed, and then actually automating the necessary code changes to break down monoliths into microservices. Another interesting tool here is Modern. They have a project called Open Rewrite, where they're automating dependency updates. So they use semantic code search to spot potential issues that might come from upgrading an outdated or vulnerable package, and then they make the necessary code changes to facilitate that update without breaking a build. So really interesting trends here. At the code and build phase, this is arguably the hottest or kind of most trending aspect of autonomous DevOps. The code and build phase is where we're seeing these generative coding platforms like Tab9 and Replit and Copilot start to emerge. These tools are capable of recommending everything from single line autocomplete to full functions. And they can also do things like convert from one language to another. They can auto add comments and documentation. And they do this all in response to user provided prompts. And the neural nets that are powering these things, they've been around for some time, right? The language models, the neural nets, but there's been a recent push towards applying those sort of foundational technologies towards code. And the commercialization of those efforts is still just sort of an incredibly new phenomenon. So I just want to quickly actually touch on this and some of the history here. I mentioned earlier the advent of the transformer and how OpenAI used that to architect and build GPT. Well, we can kind of fast forward to 2019 when Microsoft invested $1 billion into OpenAI. And in exchange, OpenAI essentially exclusively licensed a bunch of their tech to Microsoft, including GPT-3. Codex was then built on top of GPT-3. And that was really the industry's first multi-billion parameter language, so large language model, focused specifically on code. Codex gets a lot of attention because of Copilot, but there are other interesting alternatives that have emerged, things like Salesforce's CodeGen, which is built on top of T5 that came out of Google. Most of these models are trained on English language web crawl data, and then they further refine them on top of code bases. So in the case of Codex, they use Python code. CodeGen, took a similar approach using web crawl data, but then calibrated on 6 different code bases. So kind of mixed in a polyglot sort of language corpus. Tools like Replit, Copilot, Tab9 are really at the forefront of the application of these models towards DevOps. And these guys, they're measuring effectiveness and value in terms of accepted recommendations or ghost code, accepted ghost code, in addition to other sort of standard benchmarking frameworks. So Copilot was just GA'd this past June, and in just a short, few months is already claiming some pretty eye-popping statistics. They claim that on average, users are accepting 26% of all the recommendations coming out of their tool, and that on average, 27% of developers' files were generated by Copilot for the projects where it's being applied. And in the case of certain models like Python, those numbers can go as high as 40%. The Python bit, again, ties back to the influence of training data and the importance of training data, because Codex was, again, trained on Python, and so it tends to perform better with that particular language. Some of this stuff is difficult to measure. And, you could say that the code was accepted, the recommended code was accepted, but then the tools kind of lose sight on whether it was significantly edited after it was accepted. So they may not have visibility to that. But either way, the numbers are incredibly impressive. Some of the sort of patterns of utilization we've seen, people reporting that these tools are really additive and helpful with doing things like trivial copy and pasting of scaffolding code, where there's a very sort of clear pattern that's emerging and you can just sort of like copy down, as well as things like suggesting API methods. If you're starting to interact with a new API and maybe, you're not as familiar with it, they can sort of help you navigate that. Another thing we've heard and sort of seen is more senior developers tend to stick to single line autocomplete versus the full function recommendations, which has more to do, I think, with their understanding and familiarity with a code base. And so for them, it's really just about sort of the efficiency of the single line, sort of like completing a sentence, if you will. While these tools are super effective and promising, again, the statistics are pretty eye-popping. really they should be checked by engineers before being sort of blindly accepted, right? The recommendations, there's not a lot of sort of like post-check validation. I'll talk about this in a minute, but again, it goes back to the self-driving car analogy, right? Like we still need our hands on the wheels here to some extent. At the scan and testing phase, developers write multitude of tests, just part of sort of BAU activities, things, performance tests, integration tests, et cetera. Super critical, but also incredibly cumbersome to write, to maintain over time as code changes. SmartBear conducted a survey this year in which nearly half of the engineers they polled reported spending more than 70% of their time just writing and executing tests. And test suite tend to balloon over time, right? So Shopify, for example, has talked about their test suite for their monolith, their core monolith is comprised of 170,000 tests. So lots of opportunity here to sort of optimize. Testing in particular, like autonomous DevOps is a super good, it's super important to this notion of autonomous DevOps because of what we just talked about, right? The code generation tools, they're great, but they're not particularly good at validating the code they generate. And so again, testing plays this sort of critical role as sort of a toll gate or a checker, if you will. Some of the functionality here that's interesting, synthetic generation tools like Tonic and AI are using machine learning to auto-generate test data. So teams can more sort of effectively simulate production workloads without needing to expose sensitive data to lower environments. There's auto test generation tools, companies like Relics, Eggplant, Prod Perfect that are actually analyzing application traffic. So it's like functional sort of traffic within the application, functional sort of transactional traffic to inform which tests they write. So they aim to write tests that are based on the sort of flows within the application that are most commonly accessed by end users. CircleCI, Ponycode, and DiffBlue are two sort of interesting players in the unit test generation space. So unit tests are, again, just huge time suck, very tedious to write and maintain. DiffBlue is using reinforcement learning, which is capable of validating that the tests work before they sort of publish them, which, again, is moving us sort of much closer to sort of fully autonomous test generation. Test prioritization. The aim here is to, reduce computational load on test runs and improve sort of the speed of test runs. So the idea is to select tests and order them in a way where they're covering the code that's actually impacted by a given change and to sort of prioritize those first. So companies like C-Lights, as an example, are interesting players here. Visual QA tools are using vision AIs to sort of analyze down to an individual pixel level the consistency and sort of like intended functionality of a given application across different devices and browsers and platforms, as well as to do things like validate adherence to ADA and sort of disability standards, accessibility standards. Semantic code scanning tools. So from companies like DeepCode, which Snyk acquired, and Semel, which the GitHub acquired and actually formed sort of the Copilot team. They're using ML-driven semantic code analysis to speed up scan times and reduce false positives. And then the last one here to highlight is self-healing tests and self-healing code. And the idea is using elements within a given test script and automatically updating those elements as there are changes observed to the code. So, for example, the name of a DOM element changes to go in and update that functional test so that the test doesn't break the next time it runs. This also applies to scanning. So companies like Veracode with their Jaruna acquisition have introduced auto remediation capabilities, which is done in part through machine learning analysis of past vulnerability fixes. So when they identify a vulnerability in a scan, they're actually able to go in and recommend and automate the fix based on observation of sort of like past ways that fix has been handled. So moving to the release phase, this is where we're trying to optimize for time to feedback. And this is really being driven by this notion of shifting right and testing in production. Machine learning tools have really begun to unlock the shift right paradigm and make it sort of more feasible and sort of address a lot of the concerns that have historically existed around shifting right and testing in prod and introducing buggy code to customers and things like that. So one capability to highlight here is this notion of change risk prediction. Digital AI bought a company called Numerify, which has some really compelling features here. The idea is that their platform assesses test code coverage. They assess dependencies of a target system. They assess the past results of similar code changes, the past performance of the developer that's contributing the code. they wrap all that up and sort of use it to drive and define a dynamic set of toll gates where each release, depending on sort of the risk that they quantify, may have a different set of toll gates that they determine. They might decide, for example, to change like the time window that the release is done. They might decide to require some additional code reviewers and other steps that are just meant to mitigate some of the risk for a given change. Continuous verification is another really interesting concept. The platforms here are coupling the automation and sort of multi-cloud deploy capabilities of CV platforms with the telemetry and sort of like robust analytics of modern observability platforms. So whereas a team in the past may have performed some manual checks post-deploy to determine the success of the release, continuous verification platforms do all this for you. So they ingest the data, from a multitude of sources, they apply ML to assess sort of performance against baselines, detect deviations, and then actually autonomously roll back applications in the event of a perceived issue. So companies like CircleCI bought a company called Vamp and Harness are sort of leading the charge here. And then last one in this phase, auto-tuning features. So feature flagging, experimentation, really hugely important aspect of shifting right. And some of the emerging platforms like StatSig that are players in this space are using machine learning to observe user behavior and auto present to them variants that optimize for a given desired metric. So if you're trying to optimize on something like number of clicks, StatSig will sort of like use behavioral analysis to determine like, okay, this particular feature is sort of the best one of a choice of different experimentation options for you to sort of perform and execute on that desired metric. And then monitoring and maintaining, I want to highlight, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. I think this space has been around for quite some time, this idea of AI for IT ops or AI ops. The general capabilities here, I've listed out things like noise reduction, anomaly detection, root cause analysis, and then sort of downstream automation, like sort of executing runbooks. It's not to say that this space isn't important. It's just one that's sort of more mature, has been around for a while. There's like pure play vendors that have existed here, like MoveSoft and Big Panda and Asserts. There's more ITSM focused players like ServiceNow and PagerDuty and MoveWorks. And then incumbents that, are sort of extending their traditional observability platforms with machine learning, companies like New Relic and Dynatrace. But super important, really, really compelling stage, just, more mature, I would say, arguably, than a lot of the other phases that we've talked about here. So sort of starting to wrap up here, some of the challenges, right? There's a lot of interesting sort of excitement in this space, but what is the catch, right? Like, what are some of the challenges that the market is faced with, which is preventing more sort of widespread adoption? The first around training data quality. This is that old adage, garbage in, garbage out. These LLM transformers are very good at spotting patterns and making predictions based on user prompts. And sometimes, users will supply good prompts, which can lead to the models recommending good code and sort of quality code. And sometimes users can provide incomplete or sort of bad prompts, which can lead to, the opposite, which is bad code or bad recommendations. And the models, they don't care really. Like, they're happy to generate either based on what they've been shown. And so if you're coding, say, outside of your comfort zone, like you're trying to use Copilot to learn Rust and you want to start building in a new language. You might, for example, like want to sanitize an SQL variable for a new language, make an SQL call. If you don't explicitly ask the model, hey, like, I want to write this SQL call or this database call and actually sanitize my variables, the model probably won't do that. Like, if you don't prompt it properly, it's just not going to take that step. And so there's some challenges on the prompting side, but also on the quality of the code side, right? The quality of the code the models are given. So GitHub is this massive repository. There's tons of old sort of legacy code in it. There's poorly written code. There's insecure code mixed in with all the really great examples of code. And all of that gets baked into the model sort of the same, right? It's all sort of treated the same. So training data is super important. Having sort of a large enough corpus of data that's quality data is very key. Cybersecurity exploits. Look, researchers from NYU have recently published a study in which they claimed, I think, up to 40% of Copilot recommendations included some type of vulnerability. And it particularly struggled with security sensitive code. So if you wanted it to generate for you the login form on a web page, it was not particularly good at doing that in a way where it would provide sort of a secure answer to that question. The training data here, again, is a key sort of impact or influencer, same with the prompts. The researchers, for example, actually found that the strongest indicator of whether Copilot would recommend vulnerable code is whether there was already sort of a vulnerability or multiple vulnerabilities within the code base of the user. And again, that gets sort of baked in. The files that I have open get baked into the prompts. I think, this in particular, like this sort of behavior kind of amplifies the challenge here when you think about it. Like someone with a bunch of insecure code in their project is probably less likely or less inclined to notice and sort of like take account of the fact that the machine generated code is also insecure. So it sort of compounds the issue in a way. There's also IP challenges, and there's been, several sort of recently publicized examples of people observing Copilot and claiming that it is essentially just sort of copy and pasting full snippets of code without providing proper attribution, proper sort of call out to the languages, the licenses. There's actually an active lawsuit right now against Microsoft, which makes similar claims. For what it's worth, this is a really significant challenge. GitHub claims that Copilot is not intended to function this way. I don't, personally think this is happening intentionally or maliciously, but at the same time, I completely understand why people would be upset and why, if their work isn't getting sort of proper attribution, they would be upset about that. I expect GitHub to kind of fix this over time and likely by providing some type of downstream IP checking functionality prior to sort of like posting the recommendations. But it's a concern for now, but I expect over time, the sort of industry will figure out a way to sort of like address this. Maintainability is another serious challenge. The further and further removed developers are from writing code, really the further and further they may find themselves from understanding the code that's been written, which can have obvious ramifications down the line from a supportability perspective. If suddenly you've introduced a bug and it came off the back of some code that was recommended by an AI, going in and troubleshooting that and actually sort of fixing the code might be prohibitive. And then the last thing to call out is this idea of machine reasoning. And so, look, the models are very good at predicting the next token, right? But they also, they tend to struggle and lack kind of business context. So they might not know kind of what the actual end-to-end desired state of an application or what the actual like intended end user functionality is supposed to be. This makes it really difficult for the models then to validate whether the code they're generating is actually good or it actually works. And it really opens the door to potential sort of codification, if you will, of erroneous behavior or incorrect behavior. I think for now, some of the ideas that have been proposed here is coupling the models in a sort of hybrid manner with say like a rules-based semantic engine, which after they recommend code will then go and sort of validate whether the code is of a certain quality. But again, that is really still a bit of a Band-Aid and done within sort of the narrow context of the given recommended code snippet versus having this broader understanding and sort of reasoning of the end-to-end application. So I want to wrap with some thoughts around the future implications of these trends. And I'm going to do that through the lens of these three vectors: the machine learning models, the engineering experience, and the vendor ecosystem. On the machine learning models, look, I think one thing that's super important here is for the open source community to really kind of contribute more and kind of weigh in here. There still really isn't a great sort of like de facto open source standard or framework for code generation in particular. Things like Codex are proprietary. It's licensed by OpenAI, and they don't really give away all the secrets about how they pre-process the model, how they optimize the model. And I think having a viable open source ecosystem will be really key here to sort of like driving an associated explosion of new tools and vendors in these spaces. The good news is researchers have started to address this gap, and at places like Google and CMU, they're doing some really foundational work to push effective open source models out to the community. So things like T5 and Polycoder are really great examples of this. So more to come there, but looking forward to more sort of advancement and availability of really powerful models in the open source domain. Training data quality and privacy, I spoke about this. So the general idea is we need to provide better data sets with sort of a stronger corpus of positive and sort of properly secure code examples to reduce the potential for recommending buggy code or insecure code. But even beyond that, I think what we'll start to see is this trend where we'll have sort of a hybrid training model where the foundational models are then further refined on top of private data sets. So things that are not available within a public repo. So say like the source code for a large bank as an example. Companies like Tab9 are essentially already doing this, right? They take sort of publicly available data and they mix it with private data to provide sort of more tailored, more focused examples. of sort of like blessed code examples that, again, for privacy reasons, the company might not want to expose, but that they would like ultimately for the AI to recommend because it aligns with their coding styles or their particular preferences for how software is written at their particular company. And then on efficient training, look, I love this Tom Goldstein tweet. I think it just helps crystallize really like what is physically involved in training like a 500 billion parameter model like Google's PaLM. And with every version of like a GPT, the models just get larger with more parameters and require more and more compute, which obviously just over time, like it's really difficult to scale that, and there needs to be sort of optimizations. The interesting thing is like, Google published PaLM and this is a 500 billion parameter, but they also recently published a paper about this model they built called Chinchilla, in which they were able to significantly optimize compute and query performance while achieving, performance that's similar to like a GPT-3 using significantly less compute power. So I think the general sort of push here, the idea here is like we need more like chinchillas, right? We need more promising models which can achieve the performance of a GPT-3 or a Codex with a more efficient computing profile. On the engineering experience front, Andres Karpathy, which up until recently headed AI at Tesla, talked about software 2.0 many years ago, which was this idea of this sort of seismic shift where SDLC phases would be dissolved into this more sort of fluid pipeline where machine learning is used to write the software itself. And the role of developers sort of transitions from that of sort of makers into checkers and sort of like steerers of the AI. To that end, there's a lot of buzz around this idea of prompt engineering, which is like this emerging discipline which would occur within DevOps, where engineers would be tasked with essentially wrangling the model, right? If you've ever interacted with DALL-E 2 or Stable Diffusion or these AI image generation tools, I think you probably already have experience with this. It's like you write your first prompt, the sentence that you want, it returns an image, and then your brain immediately flips into kind of prompt engineering mode where you think like, okay, what else can I write? Like, how can I tweak my prompt in order to kind of bend the model in a way to get it to hand me back the image that I actually wanted? Ultimately, I think these trends will trigger this sort of further expansion of the skills that are required to be an effective DevOps engineer. So things like data engineering and machine learning disciplines like data quality and model monitoring and things like that, I think will start to become part of, what we consider to be a full stack DevOps engineer, if you will. And then finally, I think the dev interface potentially is going to sort of shift here. So, most of this is centered around the IDE today, but I think as these new tools start to emerge, it's going to be really interesting to track like what the actual implications are on the developer interface. Like, will this become more of sort of a conversational thing that you perform in sort of a natural language way with an AI? Will it become more of sort of a sketch and design focused discipline? And fundamentally, I think this is going to alter the sort of, again, the types of skills and backgrounds that make for an effective engineer. And then last thing to close with, vendor ecosystem. So look, I think one really interesting trend is the intersection with low code. Historically, low code has focused, the idea and premise of low code is focused on this democratization of application development, right? And allowing people that are non-technical users to essentially build and construct applications. I think historically software developers were often quick to kind of dismiss low code tools. It's basically saying like they lack the sophistication, they lack the ability to generate sort of like meaningful, like useful code. The irony here, and I think the thing that's so interesting is, these low code tools, what we're talking about with generative coding tools, they are low code tools. Like it's the same concept, right? Like it is auto generating things off the back of sort of like natural language prompts. It is a generative code tool like Copilot is low code. It's just approaching it from a different angle, right? The low code tools of old, like the more traditional platforms like OutSystems and Mendix, they're using very highly opinionated sort of fixed templates, versus Copilot is using, really sort of like cutting edge machine learning techniques. But at the end of the day, they're all sort of like in sort of a general sort of concept, low code. And I think what's interesting is the low code providers themselves are perhaps some of the best positioned to sort of provide the type of modeling and sort of design first interfaces that will be relevant in the future of the space. And we've already begun to see that start to take shape, right? So like Microsoft has taken GPT-3 and applied it to their Power Apps platform in order to enable non-technical users to describe and build data queries using natural language. And I expect that trend to continue. And it'll be interesting to see whether the low code providers, the more traditional ones, again, capture more and more of the sort of autonomous DevOps market. One other thing we'll expect to see here is a true kind of end-to-end autonomous DevOps platform. So, we've shared a lot of sort of interesting sort of bespoke features throughout this presentation and interesting products, but there isn't yet like a single platform that sort of pulls all of us together into sort of like a common autonomous DevOps platform. So there isn't a tool that's taking sort of design and coding and testing, deploy, monitoring, feedback, et cetera, and pulling that all into like a single unified autonomous DevOps kind of suite. But I expect that to happen. And so more to come there, but we'll look at it over time, and somebody is bound to emerge. And I think the next sort of Atlassian or GitLab, the next sort of major platform provider in the DevOps space will be really a team that's sort of like expert at machine learning and comprised of data scientists and really kind of on the forefront of this autonomous trend. And then finally, it goes without saying, but there's just massive opportunity here as these models get more powerful, as they become more and more sort of accessible in the open source domain for emerging startups. Products like Copilot are really just sort of the tip of the iceberg. And we see, a host of other opportunities where these large language models can be applied and where new startups, we believe, are going to start to emerge. So I'll wrap with that. I just, I want to just say, it's so cool. It's such like an exciting time to be sort of focused on this ecosystem. And, sort of super interested to see what the future of the space will hold. If you're a company that's building functionality in this space, we'd love to talk to you. Feel free to ping me on LinkedIn, or you can email me, carter@sapphireventures.com. And yeah, thanks for watching. And thanks again for taking the time.
Is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with CW Walker, who's Director of Product Strategy for SpyCloud. And we're talking about passwordless authentication, something that's probably long overdue, but as we're about to discover, might be a little harder to actually achieve than we think. CW, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I feel like we've been talking about this subject for a long time, and we have biometric authentication mechanisms here and there. And yet today, the most prevalent way of granting access to anybody is that same old password that people have been using ever since the caveman grunted, "Who goes there?" CW, why are we in this current situation? What is the challenge, and how soon might we find our way towards something better?
Well, soon is so relative. I think that we have been talking about passwordless authentication for a long time, and it's really only taken us 50 years to get to the point where we're discussing things like actual passless authentication with things like passkeys. But it's a spectrum, right? Where no authentication is at one end, and something very secure that maybe doesn't quite exist yet, but we're closer to that with passkeys is on the other end. And multi-factor is there, and passwords, maybe with a different complexity requirement. There are certainly steps along that path. And I think that organizations are going to take time to move along that path to get to the point where everyone is able to stay a little bit more secure without passwords.
Is it going to be more like an arc where, depending on the use case, I will use different types of authentication mechanisms, and therefore I need to kind of evaluate how much effort I'm going to put in to kind of manage this whole process versus what actually I'm trying to secure?
I think maybe until we get to the point where there's less friction. We already see a little bit of this arc, if you will, of complexity or friction for different types of applications. I've got my handy FIDO-based security tokens here for some of my most sensitive applications. But Netflix is not one of those, right? I'm not even sure it supports something like that. But it's pain. It's really, really a pain to use. And so I think that once we get to the point where we have something that is significantly more secure, and maybe passkeys are this, we'll be able to secure more accounts with higher levels because it reduces friction. But while friction is part of the process, we're going to end up falling back on less secure methods because it's just a pain. It's a pain to use YubiKeys or, one-time passwords in an authenticator app, and text message. That's more convenient, but significantly less secure, right? So I think you're right. We will have a spectrum of how secure does this application need to be until we get to the point where we have a highly secure authentication mechanism that has lower friction than what we have for multi-factor currently.
What's your best advice to folks about how to reduce that friction? What should they be looking about and thinking about before they go down this path? Because I think a lot of folks go down it initially and they don't have the right expectations, and then they get frustrated and go home.
Oh man, amen to that. I can't tell you how many hours of family IT I can log for just managing passwords in our family. Now, there are certainly things that help increase our security and reduce friction. Password managers, despite some of the challenges of outsourcing that, are really actually very good for helping, especially multiple users, keep random passwords for every account and have something that is local that they can still put in one password or use biometrics to log in. That makes a massive difference for personal security. On the enterprise side, I think what you suggested with, depending on the type of application, a different, more secure method, depending on what you're doing and what your access is, makes a lot of sense. And that's generally what we recommend as well. But bad guys, they're interested in passwords. And no matter how secure a password is, if it gets stolen, it doesn't really matter. It could be 50 characters and intensely complex. But if a bad guy has access to it, well, complexity doesn't really help in that situation. Right? Visibility does.
You talked about the hours that people spend managing passwords, plus there's all that time and effort on the end user side to go get a new password. And a lot of times they don't change them enough. And then that's part of the security mess that we're in. Do you think that organizations really understand the total cost of the current approach to managing passwords that we have and just how inefficient the whole thing is?
I mean, that's a really good question. And I think that we don't, as an industry, really comprehend the cost of managing these types of things. And despite that, passwords are still the biggest entry point into networks and our cause. I think Verizon still has them. Over 70% of compromises are related to credential either theft or leakage. And so until we're able to move into a passwordless future, which we're taking baby steps towards, that'll still end up being the case, right?
Why do we never ever seem to require people to change their passwords on some sort of regular, continuous basis? I know some folks have tried, but the bulk of people out there, it's a one-time issue and they hope for the best. And I guess the best practice, quote unquote, is, when people forget their username and password, they come up with another password, but no one actually seems to force that issue in a proactive manner.
Yeah. And NIST actually had some guidance around password rotation every 90 days. And in their most recent documentation around passwords and security, in special publication 863B, and if you want just some delightful reading on your next vacation, crack that open. But they recommend two things. Actually, They used to recommend rotation of passwords. They no longer do that. But what they recommend is checking passwords that are being created and now stored for a longer time be continuously monitored against large databases of exposed passwords to see whether or not any user has ever had that same password exposed. And the example I use is, we having really just met today, may have dogs that have the same name. And I've never used my dog's name for a password before, but maybe I'll start today. But if you have used your dog's name for a password and some number that maybe I choose as well, if your password has been stolen, that actually reduces my account security. And so being able to check users' passwords against a store of globally stolen, exposed, leaked passwords becomes even more critical in that case. And then with complexity, although enterprises require generally higher complexity requirements than, like a video game forum or, a general chat room, something like that, users don't want to remember multiple passwords. So they take the easy password that they have for their private life and they add an exclamation point and a 1, 2, 3. And bad guys know that too. So being able to understand not just a complexity requirement, but that user's password life and history starts to become more important, especially as we get into more sensitive applications.
All right. Well, I think you just made a case for having multiple dogs, but other than that,
oh, that's what my wife tells me.
Do you think that there's any combination of usernames and passwords out there that's just not on the dark web somewhere? I mean, it seems like there's more of that stuff every day, and it's almost impossible to protect them. So what's your sense of just how much do the bad guys know?
Oh man, the bad guys know a lot. Just in our research and collection, we're talking tens of billions of email and password pairs, which is enough to cover everyone on Earth multiple times. From a personal security standpoint, there are some really neat things that you can do to help protect against that. Like if you have an Apple device with a paid iCloud subscription, you can create random emails for every account that you create online. And then the email gets forwarded to your main email, which is really cool. With a random email and a random password, that really reduces the risk of, even if those two things are stolen, it's a throwaway email. So they can't plug that into every website, like your bank and your tax software and your streaming sites. And that's what I've started doing, and I love it. I'd recommend. But again, it does increase a little bit of complexity and friction. Not everyone has built a career on paranoia like we have, right?
Speaking of friction, multi-factor authentication. There seems to be a lot of fatigue on this. We're just wrapping our heads around it in many cases, and already people are going, you know what, this is kind of a pain. So what's your sense of what will ultimately be the adoption of MFA?
I think MFA adoption right now, we're sitting at the last metric I saw for all accounts, generally speaking, is a little less than 20%. If you're looking at just enterprise logins, it's a little bit higher. I think it's closer to 40. But friction, it's painful. I think that even though it does dramatically increase the security of account, it's still painful for users. And so they find ways around it. And multi-factor generally isn't the silver bullet either. We saw late last year a bunch of examples with multi-factor bombing where someone gets a notification on their phone that says, yes, it's me, log in. And bad guys just harassed those accounts. So they were getting notifications at all hours of the day until they just say, I don't even care. Just take the account over because I want the notifications to stop. So friction is one piece, but user behavior is still going to find ways around even the most secure solutions. And even beyond multi-factor, bad guys hate multi-factor, but they don't mind multi-factor when they're able to steal cookies. So after a user has already logged in, the things that we're seeing criminals get most excited about are actually session identity tokens or cookies. Because if they can steal a cookie, it doesn't matter how authentication happened, whether it's multi-factor or passkeys or an email and password. They don't need the email and password or authentication method. They just take over the session. And so we're on the bleeding edge of new ways of authenticating, and bad guys are seeing that too. And they're finding new ways to get past authentication where they don't even have to use a password, which is wild.
Yikes. Folks, you heard it here. Cookies still crumble. Hey, CW, thanks for being on the show.
Crumble. It's a pleasure. Thank you again for having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Shanae Levin, who's the CEO for CodeC, and they're just coming off getting some additional funding via one of those funds that the GitHub Microsoft folks set up to help little startups. And they're also going to be working with a few more startups, I think, who are putting stuff up on Azure, and it's all going to be one happy little ecosystem, as I understand it. Shanae, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what are the plans for this funding? What are you guys going to do with that money in terms of growing the company? What's the strategy? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, so we have really big ambitions to be able to provide code visualization and code visibility to all repos and all users. And so that's a really long way to go as far as like trying to help you understand your code. And so that money is going to go to making sure we can visualize all of the layers of your code base to answer any question that you have in a visual and really fast way.
And what exactly is the relationship with Microsoft and GitHub going forward? How does that partnership look and what are the benefits?
Yeah, so Microsoft and GitHub have been tremendous partners. We were already technology partners before this happened. And so we are better able to, one, support any startups in the Microsoft for Startups Founders Hub. So that means giving exclusive discounts to be able to help startups set up code visibility from day one so that they can continue to onboard new people to their code bases. If you haven't seen like a part of the code base before, you can essentially onboard really, really quickly. If you need to quickly pivot or refactor a particular area of code, code visibility really helps with that process. And so we want to make sure that all startups moving forward can have that really, really fast so they can, ship value to their users.
And what exactly is the problem we're solving here? I mean, people have been working with code bases forever. So when we say we're going to visualize that code, what does that actually do or manifest itself as?
Yeah, so you're right. We've been working with code bases for a really long time, but the way that we understand our code bases haven't changed in 50 years. And so all we do is we read code line by line and we visualize in our heads, we create a mental model of how that code works. And we do that before we're able to write new code or ship new code, right? Particularly if you're not starting from a hello world application. And so visualization helps you quickly create that mental model of how all of your legacy code is working. So you don't have to do it. We're saving developers, somewhere between 30 and 40% of their time because you are just reading and understanding your code. We take care of all of that for you. And essentially what happens is there are a lot of problems that come after that that are really challenging if you don't understand your code. So that could be onboarding, onboarding a brand new developer. That could be you've never seen a a part of this code base before, you switch teams. It could be that some developers have left your company and they didn't leave any documentation. That happens all the time. Or you need to refactor, or you need to you need to migrate from microservices into monoliths and vice versa. All of those different things really stem from not having visibility into your code.
Do you think as we go along, because we have more visibility, and of course you're working with Microsoft these days, and you can't hear the word AI without somebody talking about Chat GPT one way or the other.
Yeah.
But do you think that will be applied to this? Because if I can visualize the code, then I can probably throw some machine learning algorithms to analyze it.
Yeah, I think that we definitely will be able to incorporate AI to do a lot of different things. There's a lot of tools that can do very surface level things, writing functions and doing surface level understanding. But when you're talking about major applications, production ready code on like a company's code base at scale, you're going to need a lot of effort behind that. And that's going to still take us some time. I don't think that will replace developers, but we'll be able to supercharge their productivity even more. And the code visualization really gives a mental model for your entire code base, whether you're at the service level or you're at the function level or anywhere in between. And AI will enhance that instead of replacing it.
I don't think I've ever met a developer who didn't think that their ability to write code was better than the next guy's ability to write code. And this debate goes back and forth. So if I can visualize this code base, can I get to some maybe rational analysis of what's going on in these code bases that would enable these arguments to be less opinion driven and more data driven?
Absolutely. So we actually enable this today. So there's a lot of time spent sometimes, particularly in large organizations, where you're trying to really dive in. We call it code diving or splunking, where you need to go and map out all of the different pieces. And when you're trying to explain to maybe a non-technical stakeholder, why this thing's going to take this long, that conversation is hard when the other person really doesn't understand the code. And so creating a visualization helps with that cross-functional communication to get everybody on the same page and communicating effectively with each other. That's the power of having a visualization that's tied directly to the code. You can identify how actually the code is working with that other stakeholder.
One of the things that nobody likes to talk about in this industry is technical debt. It turns out there's quite a lot of it.
Absolutely.
Is this a way to kind of maybe find things that need to be prioritized over others? Because I think part of the issue is it's just so daunting, nobody gets started.
100%. So we actually have a kind of subset way that our users use use CodeC for tech debt by showcasing and labeling coordinating and prioritizing different colors and different labels and kind of laying out a bunch of areas in tech debt and kind of seeing where there are large clumps of it so that you can tackle it all at the same time and get, if you're going to add to tech debt, you can essentially just tackle it in pieces. The other way that we do this today is by when you refactor code, there's always tech debt, right? So we try to, when we help users refactor their code base, we also have a feature called code automations. That's like, hey, you refactored this. It needs to be this way moving forward. So let's create an automation to teach everybody moving forward how this works so that you don't actually create new tech debt after you're done refactoring. So we really try to help with that process as well. Like that visualization really gives that visceral reaction of like, oh my gosh, all of this tech debt is littered everywhere.
But to your point, right, it's more than just visualizations. It seems like you are giving helpful hints as to how to improve the code itself as people go along. So, do people start thinking of you guys as kind of a virtual coach for code writing?
I think so. I think today we allow for a senior dev or the CTO or an architect to really get that knowledge out of their heads in the way that it exists and make sure that it's disseminated across the team at scale. And so we can give that visualization, but you can additionally have a senior dev or an architect really say, like, this is actually the way it's supposed to be. And you can, if you're not the senior dev, you can take all of those insights as the coach. So, when you make a code change, you can actually see, any notes that's been left for you, or you can see the dependency maps. So you can actually articulate, oh, I changed this file, but it's connected to this file that I wasn't aware of. So there is a lot of help, but I think we can get a lot better at like a AI-driven code coach in time.
There's a lot of folks, they believe in various agile methodologies, and there's usually, as part of that, two developers in a box, and one is kind of writing the code and the other one sits at their elbow reviewing it, and they switch roles back and forth. But ultimately, do I need that model, or, have you become the platform or the other developer that sits at their elbow and looks over their shoulder and says, hey, you missed this. And maybe we don't need two in a box, and the whole thing will become much more efficient.
100%. We do that today where, if you are the PR author or you are, trying a team lead on the team, you can actually create async walkthroughs. And you can also use our visualizations in real time collaboratively. So absolutely, you can do all of that coaching async so that, in case someone goes out on vacation or you're in a different time zone or anything like that, you can really provide that pairing that you need to, but with a little bit more convenience.
Do you think it's the developers themselves who are finding your tool, or is the management finding the tool? Because, to be honest, there are probably some developers out there that, are a little anxiety ridden when somebody says they're going to go visualize their codes and kind of generate some sort of report from there. I'm pretty sure that that's kind of like right up there with, waking up naked somewhere. So, how do you kind of get people over their natural fears?
Yeah. So we actually find that both devs and dev leaders use Codesy. So we provide value and showcase value to individual developers. We also visualize open source projects, right? That's kind of where we got our start, where we helped maintainers visualize their projects to make sure to help them onboard contributors, right? And so we have all of these open source repos that have Codesy visualizations kind of in them, showcasing the value to developers, hands-on with the code. And so that allows for a developer to see the value, showcase what it really looks like, how they can utilize it, and then help the managers also see why it's helpful, and vice versa. So we really do try to practice what we preach. So developers trust us, essentially, that we are developers building for other developers. And so we want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
All right, folks, you heard it here. You have nothing to fear but fear itself. And we'll see what happens next. Shania, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. And alongside our episode of DevOps Unbound and a session of DevOps Experience 2022, we had plenty of great content today. We'll be back again on Thursday, so we hope to see you then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.